The rail took no more than 6 hours to bring Plex and I back to the capital. That meant it could cover a day's worth of travel in an hour. The job had taken just about a week, given all the battles. And the only reason it didn't take longer was because of my input. Considering that this world was using magic instead of technology, I wasn't sure if I should be impressed by the speed of the rail or if that much should be expected. Either way, when we pulled into the capital's junction, I sent out a message to someone who would surely be expecting it. And by the time I had walked out onto the city streets, Rayla had already arrived. She found me with a bright smile. "John." "Hi Rayla." I chuckled as she ran over, feeling a bit buttery inside. She almost jumped toward me, wrapping me up in a tight hug. Unfortunately it hurt though, causing me to grunt as she aggravated some wounds. "Oh. I'm sorry. Are you hurt?" "No, it's fine. I just need a bit more time to recover. We should get you to the hospital." "It's fine dash. No, you still need to get back to the magisterium. You can't have any lingering wounds when you go on your next trip, so let's go." Not giving any room for refusal, Rayla linked with my arm and pulled me along to the Founders Market. I just acquiesced, partly because she was right and partly because I needed to see the patriarch anyway. Soon enough, we arrived at the hospital we always went to while doing jobs. Since my face and name were rather famous here, I was quickly given service. One of the healers sent mana throughout my body, fixing any internal wounds while pushing my natural recovery into overdrive. I felt my body turn hot, as if I was working out. That process lasted for several minutes before my pain faded away and the healer finished. Then, I sat up, feeling hungry and thirsty but relieved. After paying, we headed out and grabbed some food. Rayla knew what healing could do to the body, so she had already picked out a fast food place. It was there though that she suddenly asked a question after not speaking for a while. "Have you ever thought of using some crowns?" "What are those?" I asked back at the mention of an unfamiliar term, prompting her to explain. "Crowns are enhancements for the body. Because warlocks and summoners can't strengthen their bodies like knights can, there was one major advancement made many years ago by a warlock alchemist from the church who went insane. She called them crowns, and these crowns could utilize the power of the scourge and white crystals to strengthen the human body in special ways similar to knights." "That sounds dangerous." I nodded while thinking of the implications of such a technology. A woman had to experiment using materials from scourge beasts and infusing them into her body while trying to squeeze out enhancements. Crystals from the scourge were poisonous normally, so I didn't even want to know what putting those materials inside your body would do. And Rayla nodded in confirmation. "It is dangerous, or was. In short, that warlock named Madame Tracy ended up deliberately killing herself after going insane and gave her body for her research. The church utilized her sacrifice and ended up perfecting the technology to some extent. It's been many years since then, and while getting your hands on a crown is still expensive, it's not nearly to the degree of decades ago. For higher-level warlocks and summoners, these crowns are extremely valuable enhancements to their strength that can eliminate some weaknesses." I hummed while munching down on some food. These crowns really did seem valuable, but I didn't know enough about them to make a decision right now. I responded while finishing my meal. "I'll have to ask Maxwell about them, then." "You should. I've known many warlocks in the military who have used them without side effects, and there are many that go beyond simply making your muscles stronger. I've heard of one that can enhance your vision several times over, something you might like." "That does sound interesting." I smiled while imagining what it would be like to have such powerful eyes. I wouldn't even need scopes for my rifles. Taking note of all this information, Rayla and I made our way over to the Tavera territories, arriving before their headquarters. I was welcomed in, and Rayla followed me to the office of the Patriarch. "Ah, John. Very good to see you in good health. Congratulations on the successful trip, and thank you for your good work. I've received a report from Ignav." The Patriarch stood, the two of us shaking hands before taking a seat. I smiled, glad he was aware of everything. "Yes, Patriarch. Although we lost some men and cargo, I would say it went rather well." "Indeed. I'm aware that your contributions were a major factor in our success. I don't have all the details since Ignav is still busy over there, but his praises spoke enough. I believe you have a letter for me?" I took out the wax-sealed letter and handed it to the Patriarch, who broke it open and read through the single page within. He took a minute, nodding a few times, before setting it down with a thoughtful smile. "I see. Well, I suppose that's the only number I need. Tell me, John, what was your kill count on this trip?" Even a rough estimation is fine. I believe the count was around 35. So if all the enemies you killed had an average strength around tier 3 or 4, then you would be receiving about 175 gold bullion for your kills. Along with the initial 85 and not even factoring in certain higher value kills, that makes at least 260 gold bullion for the job. With other factors, it's actually more like 280 to 300. However, Ignov mentioned nothing about kill counts. Instead, he told me what to pay you directly. I was silent as the patriarch made some rough calculations. And when he finished, he suddenly reached into a drawer, pulling out a wooden box. He slid it toward me before sitting back and waving. Your payment for the job, John Cooper. I was curious as I slowly reached over and popped the latch of the box. Even Rayla couldn't help but lean forward. And opening the box, I saw 6 columns of glistening gold coin. With my quick mind enhanced by Psycha, I counted 100 coins in each column. That made 600 gold bullion, or 600,000 coin. All for 1 week of work. But I didn't immediately take it. While the sight made me salivate, I was wondering why I was being paid double of what I deserved based on my kill counts. The patriarch explained as if reading my mind. In the report and letter, I was told that you did a fantastic job in killing enemy warlocks, of which constituted most of your kills. However, establishing that kind of superiority did more than just kill others. You also saved my men. I had been expecting to lose at least half of that convoy since we've been stretched thin lately. But you, John, managed to cut those potential losses in half. This payment is for the lives you saved alongside the enemies you killed, and believe me, I value keeping Tavera lives more than delivering death to our enemies. So go ahead and dump that coin into your card. You aren't allowed to leave until you do. He spoke with a smile, making me scratch my head in embarrassment. It felt weird being praised like this, even if I also enjoyed it. So while trying to look as humble as one could doing such a thing, I grabbed the rows of coin and tossed them into my bank card. Just like that, my savings had doubled to reach over 1 million coin, or 1,000 gold bullion. Even then, it was still hard to believe that my services were worth so much. Though, that feeling conflicted with the undying pride I had in my guns. For now at least, I remained humble. Later I would have the time to sing my own praises about how totally awesome American violence was. Oh, some extra cigars for you as well. Don't worry, the ones that normal humans can use are rather cheap, so just think of it as an extra bonus. The patriarch also handed me a small box of cigars, ones identical to those I had received from Captain Ignov. There were 30 inside the box, which I stashed into my spatial bracelet. With that, my business concluded with the patriarch. Just in case though, I notified him that I would soon be gone for a month on a hunting trip with the magisterium. After all, I wouldn't be able to take jobs for that duration. He assured me that was okay and gave his apologies for taking me away from school in the first place. After that, Rayla and I left. It was currently evening, so Rayla would have to go to work soon. But until then, we decided to spend some time together at her place, her wanting me to recount my time on that trip. So I did so until she left, after which I headed back to my dorm at the Magic College. Where the hell have you been? I seem to recall telling you that I would be gone for a bit. I responded while flinching away from the harsh voice of the puppet master. I knew why he was unhappy. I missed over a week of training, and in only 6 more days, I would be heading out to finally fight the Scourge alongside the military. Not that I hadn't gotten any training in either. I would argue that fighting humans was much more difficult than fighting mindless beasts in every way. If I could preserve my life against an organized assault spanning several days, then I could survive against some monsters. Mr. Puppet scoffed at my answer though. You told me you would be gone, but not for a week. You barely have any experience fighting my puppets, and you want to march onto a battlefield and fight scourge beasts? Do you not value your life? Hey, I at least wasn't idle. Combat experience is combat experience, regardless of the enemy. Just how many people did you kill on this trip of yours? A few dozen. Humph. Even with the threat of extinction, humanity can't seem to put aside its own petty desires and squabbles. What a waste of lives. Mr. Puppet let out a deep sigh laced with a hint of contempt. He wasn't disagreeing with what I did specifically, but the entire situation as a whole. And I could understand. You'd think with the vast enemy that was the Scourge at their doorstep that humanity would come together under the threat of mutual extinction and devote everything they had to stopping it. But instead, there was infighting that resulted in the loss of countless lives. People that could put their efforts toward killing another beast were being wasted. But the kingdom of Dragon Tongue had been around for a long time, and that existential threat was no longer so bad. They had defended for so long and were numbed to the constant shadow of their enemies until they were able to ignore it. Only if they were on their last legs would they finally wake back up enough to feel themselves being drowned and overwhelmed. Then again, that naivety could only be afforded by the sacrifice of those who stood at the forefront. After feeling a bit somber myself, Mr. Puppet snapped me out of it. Whatever. This week you're going to be doing nothing but training. I'll set up scenarios every day for you and your teams. I suggest you learn everything you can and get used to these types of battles, because you'll be facing it for real soon enough. Anyway, go ahead and get out there now. Regular hunting today, but I'll modify things specially for you. Survive for the next 2 hours and I'll consider today a good day. I hummed and walked out, entering the portal after throwing on the protective band. Then, I was dropped into a mountainous region. There were hills, sheer cliffs, ravines, and mountains all around me. And not long after appearing, I heard a somewhat distant roar. It seemed I would be the prey instead today. So with a sigh, I picked my weapon, equipped my air mask, and started running. Ha! Ha! With labored breaths, I made it to the top of a small mountain. Then, I suddenly turned around, the barrel of my shotgun humming a tune as it followed. A beast screamed from behind. Scree! Boom! The empowered slug took off its head, the body falling down the steep trail and crashing into several other corpses. After that, I posted up behind a large boulder, taking out my rifle and getting ready. A few hundred meters away, I could see around a dozen puppets running their way toward me. For the entire time in this barren mountain range, I had been constantly hunted down by small groups of beasts that the puppet master no doubt controlled to attack me. I used the land to my advantage since I couldn't hide, constantly battling and running. There was no chance to sit still, because relaxing meant that I wasn't killing an enemy that was coming toward me. Bang! The scoped rifle in my hands accurately felled a monster below. At the same time, I saw a lance of magic appear beside another beast. I didn't so much as flinch when the lance flew and hit the boulder I was on top of. These beasts needed to be much more accurate if they wanted to hit me behind such advantageous cover. Bang! I took out the monster that failed to distract me, moving on to the others and letting off more rounds. By the time they were about to reach me, there were only 3 left. So I put away the rifle and took out a revolver in my right hand and a sawed-off shotgun in my left. I fired the revolver, letting off all 6 rounds in the cylinder. With those rounds, only 1 monster died, the bullets not packing a heavy punch and not carrying much of my psyche. Now there was 2 left, and when the first one dove at me, I fired the shotgun. Boom! It blew its head off, but there was still another. I barely aimed again before firing. Boom! Another shell, but this time, I only took off an arm. The monster still lunged toward me. It was big and shaped like an alligator with large claws and a huge mouth. Its tail thrashed violently while it screamed in pain, all the while it was still trying to kill me. Just about every puppet I had killed wouldn't stop trying to kill me unless I put it down. No injury would stop it, not even a blown-off limb. That had caught me by surprise twice, and those 2 incidents were valuable experiences that taught me the difference between humans and these beasts. So as I saw the claw of this beastly alligator coming at me, I thought of a few ways to combat it. 2 of my guns were empty, and communing with another gun didn't happen instantly. My next move wouldn't consist of a weapon. But I was a quick thinker, even before Psyche enhanced my mental faculties so much. And using that quick brain of mine, I suddenly swung my shotgun. Smack! The alligator's body was bashed to the side, the claw missing my body. Then, I kept swinging the heavy shotgun, beating its head into a pulp. Fuck off, you damn lizard! Scree. It let out another loud sound before recovering and trying to attack again. But right as it did, in my hand appeared a lever-action rifle, which I placed against the alligator's head. Bang! Its body collapsed as a new hole was created next to its eye socket. With that, I sighed and took a seat on the nearby boulder, finally being able to feel the cool breeze across my sweaty face. I looked around into the distance. Because I was close to the top of a mountain, I could see the wider world. But that wider world was cut off by some kind of invisible wall, no doubt the bounds of this constructed place. I really wondered what kind of power allowed someone to just create miniature worlds like this one on a whim. Even the puppets were impressive because they seemed just like regular beasts. It could obviously only be done by magic, but to think that any level of magic could allow someone to do this was absurd. How were you supposed to kill someone like that? Was it possible, even with my guns, to ever pose a threat to that kind of existence? It seemed impossible, even more so to think I could ever reach that height myself. During my time in this world, I had never truly entertained the idea of reaching the highest pinnacle of power. It simply seemed too far away. For someone like me who came from another magicless world, I didn't believe myself to be a part of that same system, so I didn't even think it would be possible. I would continue to build my power so long as I could. How far that would lead, I didn't know. I'm sure I could do great things even if I only reached Authority 8 like Rayla. But for now, the notion of reaching something like Authority 12 was completely beyond me. It didn't even seem like a cool thought. It was just overwhelming, like thinking of every problem I would ever have to face throughout this life and packaging it all into a single box. In fact, I'm sure it entailed nothing less. Ambition was good, but only up to a certain point. I could feel that as I thought about these things. And soon enough, my time on this hunting ground was finished. I was teleported out, appearing alongside several others who had also been hunting like me. John, I knew I heard you in there. Tana spotted me not long after appearing. She, along with the others I had once teamed with, came to greet me. Amara and Hubert smiled as we shook hands. Hey, where have you been all week? You just disappeared. I was on a business trip. Is that what gave you the new scar on your head? Amara moved to my side and traced the wound on my temple. Even Hubert moved over curiously to see it. I shrugged. It was a bit eventful. Apparently. Listen up. Suddenly, we were interrupted by the puppet master. Everyone turned, seeing him standing at the door to his monitor room. For the next several days, I will be running scenarios for all of you. Your trip is coming up at the end of the week, and I intend to prepare you all. These scenarios will all be difficult, and very few of you will be able to get perfect scores. I will also be shuffling the teams twice, so you will need to learn to cooperate with others you don't know. This means you need to prepare yourselves for several days of exhaustion and pain. Remember that recovery is also a part of battle, so I won't be hearing any excuses. And none of you are allowed to skip. Well, isn't that great? Everyone groaned, already feeling the oncoming torture. After that, we were let go. I walked with my little group back to the dorms. Hey John, what exactly do you do? Beyond the magisterium, I mean. Hubert suddenly asked. When I looked at him, I could see him eyeing my coat. Well, everyone eyed my coat at some point. It was subtle, but if you got a decent look at it, it wasn't hard to tell that it was expensive. I smiled a bit sheepishly. I'm just a delivery man. Delivery? What do you deliver? Oh, you know, just whatever packages need to be moved. People call the company I work for and request deliveries between them and a client. I'm responsible for picking up those packages and making sure they get to the customer. Wow. Sounds simple enough. Then, how much does delivery work pay? It depends on the job honestly. Regardless, I just worked and saved as much money as I could before entering this place. I don't have many things that I can call my own, but the few things I do are valuable enough. I see. Hubert nodded, as did the two girls. My words were vague, but it wasn't like they would guess that I worked in the black market. But then, Amara tilted her head. So that business trip was a delivery, right? So what exactly gave you that scar? A package fell on me, had some metal items in it. I barely dodged, but it still cut the side of my head. But you got it healed, no? It's a new but healed scar. And usually when you get healed, scarring doesn't occur, especially not that badly. I only got it partially healed, enough to stop the bleeding and seal it. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough money to get it completely healed and erased. I made something up on the fly, interrupting Amara's train of thought. It seemed she was rather sharp, or just enjoyed digging into other people's business. Thankfully she dropped it with a shrug. It wasn't like I was adamant about keeping my line of work a secret, but it also wasn't something I intended to broadcast either. The fewer people who knew about who I was, the better. After all, I had a not-so-small target on my back. I had killed no small amount of people and pissed off far more. Despite being neutral, I wouldn't be surprised if the Clockwork Association put a bounty on my head. It seemed Tana and Hubert were still a bit suspicious though, which I couldn't do much about. Not long later, we arrived at the dorms. Saying our goodbyes, all of us retired for the night. The following days were filled with constant stress. The puppet master was serious about getting us ready. Every day, he had a new scenario which involved different monsters and different maps. From dark forests to bright white deserts, he threw us into every situation imaginable. One scenario required us to hunt down a particular monster hidden within the aforementioned dark forest. Another required us to hold off against hordes of monsters within an established base. We even had to escort a person from one base to another, the person being a puppet who wasn't allowed to be hurt during the transport. All of the scenarios had us on our toes and stressed our wits. They all also lasted between 4 and 8 hours. Needless to say, the following mornings were all dreadful. I had no time to cultivate my authority or practice controlling my aura. My main focus was just surviving each day and trying to do well. Another downside was how I was slotted with a different team every single scenario. I saw no person twice. This required me to get to know a couple dozen elites and operate around their skill sets. Luckily, because the different types of magi only fell into 3 categories, it got easy to guess what each person could do as a baseline. For example, I could generally predict how capable a warlock was and how they fought. I knew that knights were either defensive or offensive, not having much utility at all, and were almost always close combat fighters. As for summoners, I only saw one of those. And he was an interesting fellow. We got along well. That summoner was a hot summoner, as opposed to cold, who could summon ethereal beasts to his side. It was the textbook example of a normal summoner. He was able to summon 3 beasts, one of which was a serpent while the other 2 were a bear and tiger. He made a contract with those spirits at the beginning of the scenario, and they stayed with him throughout the entire thing. But, unlike me who actively communes with my spirits, he had to give them payment up front. This meant that his psyche was massively drained before anything even began, and sending the spirits back early would waste some of the psyche he spent. It was a generally strict system without nearly the same flexibility mine had. Of course, because he was also an Authority 5, his spirits were powerful. They could go toe-to-toe with several of the puppets we fought, holding the line just as well as a knight. Only, when one of his spirits was killed, he suffered backlash. That was yet another downside of normal summoning. Either way, I got a perfect score for 3 out of 5 scenarios. It was rather exciting, and even the puppet master was impressed, though he tried his best not to show it. Like that, the end of the week came. Only the 4th years were to leave for their trip at this time. Everyone else had another month or so before they would go. So a few days before our departure, the entire 4th-year dorm was flooded with letters regarding the trip. In it were the details. At the end of the week, we were to take a rail out of the capital and head to the frontier military installation known as Calatrop Base. We would be accompanied by several 4th-year instructors, one of which was the puppet master. Once there, we would be given assignments in groups. And although we were being treated with a bit of special courtesy, it was generally expected that we learn to live in the military environment as normal soldiers. This meant we would have tight bunks and need to know certain protocols and rules. Of course, we were also granted a bit of leniency. Not only had we students not gone through basic training, but we were also talented and powerful individuals. Everyone in the 4th year of the magisterium was young yet much more capable than the rest. If you couldn't hit certain benchmarks, then you would leave early for basic training, continuing your magical advancement within the walls of a base. If you made it to the 4th year, you were almost guaranteed to reach Authority 8 at some point in your life. So although it was naive thinking, to expect the 4th-year students to be able to hold their own wasn't unfounded, even in a military environment. They had some weight to throw around, especially when most of those in the general population had no magical power to speak of. That held true even in the military. I was curious to see how things were run, if I was being honest. I wasn't completely unfamiliar with the military on Earth, and I knew that medieval armies lacked organized training and systems compared to modern militaries. I wondered if that were true here, though I doubted it considering humanity was constantly under attack by the scourge. They couldn't lack military development, otherwise they would have fallen long ago. So I looked forward to it all. More than that, I looked forward to truly facing the scourge for the first time. Thankfully, the puppet master gave us the day before our departure off. I didn't even go to classes that day, just spending my time taking care of business. I had a few people to talk to, the first being my mentor. Standing outside the Black Spider Hotel, I saw as carriages came and went, each of them dropping off rich or influential figures. This place was always full of those individuals. You couldn't come to this place otherwise. Of course, there were lucky exceptions like myself. But the vast majority of people would never so much as hear about this place, let alone knew what existed behind the luxurious exterior. I entered after some men in suits and robes. At the desk, I saw the key master checking them in and handing them bronze keys. Afterward, they all disappeared into the elevators. I walked over once he was free, smiling. "Good day, key master. Having fun? John. A pleasure to see you here. And I always have fun checking in esteemed political guests. Is that so?" I leaned on the desk, looking to where those political figures disappeared. Who were they? 2 marquises and 3 powerful merchants. They've come here to discuss business, as many of such stature do. This place not only acts as a hotel, but a grounds for diplomacy and exchange. You could say it's a neutral territory guaranteed by the hotel itself. By the hotel? Not the Polaris family? Indeed. The Black Spider Hotel is its own entity. The Polaris family operates behind the face of the Black Spider and within its market. Wow. I guess that makes the hotel powerful. I mumbled while visualizing everything in my head. How powerful did you have to have the Polaris family, a known behemoth in the black markets above even the Tavera family and Apocryon's trenches, hide behind your authority? It implied that this Black Spider was much more than just the name of the market, an entity all to itself, and one that held more power than the other factions. All of which was shocking, because I had never heard anything about this before. I thought I knew about more than the average, even within the black markets. After all, I had basically uninhibited access to both markets and worked with a few large organizations within each. This was all afforded to me by Plex, but my point still stood. And sitting even deeper in the darkness of the black markets was an invisible monster I had never even known about until the key master gave me this subtle glimpse. It took a bit of self-control on my part to not take a look at the key master, trying to hide the complex thoughts in my head. I was also questioning the identity of this man behind the desk. Unassuming and always treating everyone with professional courtesy, he seemed like nothing more than his station, a simple clerk. But, he was always here. Always. I could enter this lobby at any hour of the day and he would be here. In fact, his absence was rarer than otherwise. According to Plex, if he wasn't there, then the entire black market would be on high alert. Just how powerful was the key master? Shit, my aura. I suddenly snapped out of it. I forgot that I couldn't conceal everything about my state of mind. My aura was acting out of my control. With a deep breath, I forced myself to forget about everything, turning back to that unassuming clerk. "Well, key master, don't work too hard. You as well, John. I hear you're about to leave for your hunting trip. Calatrop base, correct?" Yeah. I was half surprised, and half expectant to hear him say that. It was another peculiar thing about the key master. He seemed to know everything. He knew when I was going to meet Maxwell for the first time. Back then, I assumed it was because this hotel was under the jurisdiction of the Polaris family, and by extension, the key master knew about some of the affairs within it. If he was notified to look out for my arrival, then it was expected. But if this hotel was its own separate entity, then the key master wasn't affiliated with the Polaris family. He shouldn't have known. And maybe I was looking too far into it, but I didn't think he should know about my destination. But I quickly pushed all that to the back of my mind. I'm planning on talking to Maxwell about some things before I go. Understandable. Then I won't take any more of your time. Please go ahead. An elevator is waiting for you. When you come back, however, I have something to speak to you about. Oh, well, all right. Later then. With a bit of awkwardness in my step, I walked past the desk and entered the elevator. Like that, I entered the market where I found my way to Polaris headquarters. I entered Maxwell's study with a sigh. "Hey, Maxwell." "Oh, hello, John. I was expecting your arrival." He set down a book, looking at me through a magic monocle. "I see the puppet master has been getting you ready." "Good. Yeah, he's really wearing us to the bone. I just wanted to ask if there was anything I should prepare." "Well, not as if you can't bring most of what you own with you. Just make sure you have the white crystal and the cultivation formations. I expect you to make good progress while you're gone." "Really? It feels like I'm going to get nothing done." I scratched my head. The formations for Authority 4 were incredibly complex, and understanding them was proving to be several times more difficult than that for Authority 3. It felt like I would need at least several months. I didn't believe I could finish before the end of the year, at least, which was in 3 more months. But Maxwell thought otherwise. Authority 4 is a watershed. Your mind will go through great changes in the process of advancing. Unlike the previous authorities which merely required you to accumulate before breaking through barriers, you will change the very essence of your psyche and go through an evolution. This is why the formation is far more complex, because it will guide you through the process of that evolution. So, think of it not as one large array for simply gathering power, but a guide for circulating your power step by step. Alright. I recalled the formation as he spoke, realizing that I should take his advice and change the way I was approaching comprehending the formation. After that, he leaned back into his seat. By the end of the month, I expect you to have comprehended the entire formation. After that, it will probably take you around 4 months to advance. Oh. Well, I guess that's not too bad. I scratched my chin. It was a bit shorter of an estimate than I expected, but reasonable. The hard part though was comprehending the formation. It seemed I had my work cut out for me. This trip would be difficult in more ways than one. Maxwell and I spoke a bit more about the expectations for the trip. It seemed straightforward, and anything else I needed to know would be spoken of at the base. But beside that, there was another topic to discuss. By the way, Rayla spoke to me about crowns. I wanted to hear your opinion on them. Crowns, He went silent in thought, formulating his words. They are very useful tools, but only if used correctly. Crowns are derived from specific scourge beasts, taking their abilities, fusing it with a white crystal, and permanently engraving the body with it. Naturally, this makes the most important detail the beast you've taken an ability from. Each body can only accommodate a certain amount of crowns, so finding the right one for you is extremely important, just as much as its overall power. Okay. So do you have any recommendations? Well, I can give my opinion, but you know your skills best. Regardless though, you won't be receiving one anytime soon. To acquire a crown is difficult beyond cost. Finding the right beast can take time, and the best crowns come from unique beasts and royals. Neither of those are something you can hope to kill, and you surely don't have the money to buy one. Anything lesser likely isn't worth it for you, so it's best to forget about it until you reach around authority 6 or 7. Damn. That's a long ways away. I frowned. I knew things took time, but these crowns seemed cool, and I obviously wanted one now. But they were permanent, so like tattoos, I didn't want to get something I would regret down the line. That made it something I would only truly deliberate quite a while from now. After discussing all that, Maxwell had nothing else to say, so I took my leave. I headed back to the key master's desk on my way out, morbidly curious as to what he wanted to tell me. Hello again, key master. Ah, John. Here, allow me to pass on some news. The key master spoke with a smile. It seemed there's been a bounty placed on your head. That actually happened? My eyes widened. I had just been worried about something like that, but I didn't think it was actually possible. But after lifting his arm, I saw the key master expose an aerial. This was the first time I'd seen accessories on his person. He tapped it a few times, revealing a screen that hovered above his arm. On it was a list, and he found my name before tapping it. He turned the screen, allowing me to read. Bounty for John Cooper, known as the American. 22 years old, 6 foot 4 inches in height, is a fourth-year student at the Magisterium and worker for divine distribution. Estimated power is Authority 5, a cold summoner with projectile weapons. Bounty is set to 40,000 coin. I was silent for a while, seeing the profile that had a decent grasp on who I was. It was rather scary, but I couldn't help but notice something. I frowned. That's it? 40,000? It's a decent bounty. Not enough to move the high-class hunters but enough to cause you trouble. It seems it was just recently put up. Right. This time, I went silent for a different reason, remembering what I had been thinking about when I was previously speaking with the key master. Who the hell was this guy? And what the hell was that program he was using? I didn't know about any sort of programs for the aerial devices beyond calling and texting. Sure, you could send images and the like, but there wasn't much functionality besides that. It surely wasn't anything like phones from Earth. But this seemed to be some kind of program or service not unlike the internet. If that was the case, and there really was some kind of magic internet here, then I really wanted to know how to use it. And I really wanted to know what that program was that would allow me to see my bounty. The key master closed the program. I recommend you be careful, John. I don't believe you'll have trouble with the hunters that come your way, but do be sure to take precautions so you don't get attacked and killed while unaware or vulnerable. Thankfully you will be leaving tomorrow morning, so the interest in the bounty will subside and turn to low levels by the time you come back. Right. That's a very fortunate coincidence. Yes. Stay within the Magisterium though. It is your safest option besides within this hotel. I don't recommend leaving for anywhere within the city, and if you must do so, right now is the best time. Okay. Thanks, Keymaster. I'll take off now then. Of course, John. Safe travels. With that, I said goodbye. Unfortunately, I couldn't quite go back to the magisterium. I had a small bit of shopping to do. I needed a few more sets of clothes, something I seemed to lack. In fact, I had planned some time with Rayla to do so. I planned to go see her after Maxwell and finish off my night with her. And my plans didn't change, but now I was anxious with an actual target on my head. Not long later, within a tailor shop of the Founders Market specializing in defensive and enchanted clothing, I found Rayla. This place was one we had come to before. John, you look tired. Those scenarios really kicked your ass, huh? Yeah. Though, I guess there's something I should tell you. Briefly, I told Rayla about the new bounty. And with a single sentence, she seemed shocked in several ways. You said the Keymaster told you about it? Yeah. Weird. But either way, this isn't good. That bounty system is known as the Black Spider Registry. They call it a web, and it's a place that can only be accessed by aerials with special functions attached. I don't know much more than that since even I don't have access to it, but I do know that it's a place for assassins known as hunters. Anybody within it can place a bounty on someone's head, so long as they have the money. People can even bid to increase the prize, and the killer gets the big payout. That doesn't sound good. There's a lot of people who want me dead. Yes, there are. Unfortunately, it comes with the job. Do you have a bounty? Me? Please. She chuckled. I'm not that amazing. You kill much more people than I do, mainly because of the way your weapons work. But, I've known people who have been killed by hunters. One of them was one of Plex's prior apprentices, someone who got greedy and angered some very wealthy people. I thought back, remembering being told about that. It seemed there was more to the story, but only now was I realizing just how dark this stuff could get. Now, I was being hunted. And unless that bounty came down at some point, I would need to watch my back. Perhaps sensing my stress, Rayla grabbed my hand and pulled. Hey, it'll be fine. I'm here now, so I won't let anyone touch you. Okay, princess? Heh, thanks. I chuckled a bit as she pulled me through the shop. There were plenty of basic clothes hanging on racks. All of them had self-sizing features, temperature regulation, and decent defensive properties. At the very least, it wouldn't be torn by anything other than a blade and would remain in great condition through even the roughest treatment. Considering I was heading to a battlefield, this was the stuff I wanted. We picked out several basic shirts, some black, some white, and others with some cool designs on them. This world was very modest in its clothing, at least in regards to colors. Unless you were rich, you probably weren't getting your hands on much colorful wear. But to have some nicer shirts and pants wasn't out of the question, especially for people like us. Rayla often liked to wear dark red and black, colors that went well with her blood red hair. I always wore my black overcoat, so Rayla picked out some shirts that could accentuate from underneath the coat and pants that matched it. She even picked out a few pairs of shoes, some more like boots, others more formal looking. By the time she was done, my spatial bracelet was loaded. I would need to bring an actual bag to pack some things. To think I actually have enough things to pack a bag. I sighed as we left the store. Those words were heavier than I thought. I had plenty of things back on Earth. Devices, dozens of articles of clothing, accessories, things I could fill a room with. I had an apartment back then, and it wasn't empty. But here, there wasn't much to call my own. The clothes on my back and the few accessories I had were all there was. It was a bit amazing, having all these things. I wondered if one day, I could get a real home and fill it with a bunch of things. It seemed impossible. I was living such a different life here. Suddenly, I looked toward Rayla. Since I needed a chest for my items, we decided to go and get one. But as I watched her lead me down to another shop, I wondered if she was having the same dilemma. After everything she had gone through with her late husband and being in the position she was as a former military member and working in the black market, she was likely finding it impossible to truly settle down somewhere. Getting a house, a home, might seem nice on the surface, but it represented far more than just owning the property. It was about establishing a place for you to settle down, a place that you were committing to. On a more intimate level, it was a place to grow a family with the person you loved. For Rayla, who had all of that taken away from her, maybe she couldn't find it in herself to take that step, to finally give in and settle. She already had enough money to get a nice property within the city and never work another day in her life. But here she was, still working as a delivery woman and giving the excuse that she was still saving up. It made my heart ache. Here, what about this one? She pointed to a chest as I finally snapped out of it. I didn't really know how I got into a furniture shop, but I just went with it. The chest before me looked completely ordinary, but apparently it had some magic locks and was structurally enhanced. It was really difficult to break into, and the key for it could apparently track it and alert me to tampering. Of course, it was also 50,000 coin, but hey, had to protect my investment, right? I bought it without thinking too much, dumping a stack of gold bullion on the counter before finalizing the sale. As a courtesy, they even engraved my name on it, the guy writing it on the lock right then and there. After that, I picked it up. It was large, more than enough for what I needed. It was also enhanced with spatial magic, making it contain much more than its actual size. This didn't make it that much more expensive though because, unlike spatial sacks, this thing didn't have to worry about making a small accessory contain so much space. It was kind of heavy though. And unluckily, just as we were getting ready to leave, my neck suddenly tingled. I turned, just in time to see a patron within the store jump toward me. I raised the chest into the path of the short sword. Ting! The chest easily blocked the blade, even though I was actually knocked to the ground. Shit! Rayla cursed as I tumbled across the ground. In her hand appeared her staff, mana whipping around her as a spell rapidly assembled. But the man, who I quickly deduced as a hunter, was only focused on me. Unluckily for him though, I was quick to equip my trusty boomstick. The shotgun barrels lined themselves up with his lunging body, my psycha infusing into the shells. Boom! The explosion shook the shop, the slugs from my shotguns hitting the man so hard his body was flung away. I broke open the double barrel the next moment, removing and slotting in 2 new shells with practiced movements. I was getting pretty good. Shockingly though, I wasn't finished. The man still jumped to his feet, though not uninjured. He now had an extra hole in his stomach. The fact that he could move at all though spoke to his incredible strength. After all, that was 2 empowered slugs. I scoffed. All of you knights are cockroaches, I swear. Even the dumbass can get tough enough to survive their stupidity. I grumbled while climbing to my own feet. In that time the hunter brought out some small sphere and crushed it. It let out a blue foam, one that spread over the wound and seemed to seal it. After that, he suddenly dodged as a barrage of spells shot toward him. My shop. Go fuck yourself. Rayla cursed as she fired off her magic. Some were inaccurate, but others hit their mark. What seemed like magic missiles battered the hunter into a bloody mess, even more so than my shotgun blast. He was pushed toward me, and with a dodge, used Rayla's spell to take another lunge. But I was ready, my shotgun drawn and my finger squeezing. Boom! Another explosion, and this time, he wasn't so lucky. His chest was blown open, the corpse sliding across the floor in front of me. Right after that, Rayla placed 5 gold bullion on the shop counter before grabbing my arm and running out. That was a hunter. We need to get out of here. Not without my chest. I shouted while diving for the chest, picking it up and looking over it. There wasn't a single scratch on it, making me nod. Money well spent. Now let's get to the school. Saying that, the both of us made a beeline for the magisterium. Thankfully, that seemed to be the only hunter. I felt like I was being watched as we were leaving the market, but not long after getting out, that feeling disappeared. Then, we got a carriage to take us to the school. It was only after arriving at the gates that Rayla sighed in relief. That was almost bad. You've got good instincts. It's my practice with aura. Looks like I have more of a reason to keep practicing. I smiled while thinking back. I reacted to that man before I even knew what was happening. That level of intuition almost felt clairvoyant. At the same time though, it let me know just how important something like that was in a fight. I would need to focus on it during my trip. Rayla also smiled. I'm glad. You leave tomorrow morning, right? I'll be there to send you off. I won't turn that down. Good, because I won't let you. I'll say goodbye then, so for now, get a good night's rest. She gave me a hug, which I returned. And inwardly, I sighed. Rayla was an amazing woman. Smart, level-headed, beautiful, and powerful. But as time went on and I learned more about her, I only became more conflicted. She was someone I wouldn't mind truly dating. She seemed like someone I could be happy with, and she was someone I wanted to make happy. But 2 issues ate at me. For one, I didn't want to do anything out of pity. That wasn't right for either of us, and given her story, there was a lot of it. But more importantly, I also have much of my life ahead of me. I was only beginning my path to power. At the very least, I wanted to reach Rayla's level before settling. My powers, my ability to summon weapons and gear from Earth, was too amazing not to cash in on. It would bring me much desired security that I could protect a family with. So I couldn't begin a real relationship with Rayla. At least, not yet. If I ended my path, and both of us were still in the same place, then I don't believe I would hesitate. But a lot could happen in the years it would take me to reach that end. And in the back of my mind, that thought made me fear for her. Fear that I wouldn't be able to give her what she had lost. Fear that I may not give her the fulfilling end she deserved. That hypothetical scared me, even though it was something I had to face. If there was ever someone else, then would I really be able to forget Rayla? Would I really deny her everything I could give? As I separated from her and left into the magic college, I silently brooded over that thought, both hoping that I would someday find someone and dreading the prospect of actually doing something about it. And the fact that I hoped for it at all left me in a spiral of self-loathing. That night, I went to sleep with a lot on my mind. A magic formation filled my mind. It was too complex to comprehend in its entirety, but somehow intuitively I completely understood how to use it. I could feel the psyche within my mind begin to cycle as I followed the formation's directions. The psyche became thousands of little stars of power in the space of my mind, and as it cycled, they created streaks like comets yet contained themselves within a small area as if quartered by an invisible orb. This small area of chaotic shooting stars became a huge bundle of power, but more than that, as it grew in size, I found my mind becoming clearer, faster, as if that small area was becoming a second brain. At some point, those stars of power that were drawing lines with their converging movements became so fast that they became a white orb, the streaks of those stars becoming so blinding that you couldn't differentiate between the hundreds of them within such a small space. Compared to the rest of the space within my mind, however, the white orb was still small. It was like a marble compared to the size of the brain. But despite that, the power it contained made me feel as though it were trying to match my brain in sheer power, yet falling short because of my own inability. That small white orb of fleeting psyche enhanced my mental faculties in every way. My speed of thought, given a rough estimation, went up by around a third. But more importantly than that, it felt like I had unlocked the ability to control my thoughts with greater discipline. It was like that orb was a device that I could control, one that could be directed to process certain things. Controlling it was no different from controlling my psyche, which was like a limb. And in the center of all of it, filling every corner of my mind and allowing this orb to form in the first place, was that massive formation. From a cursory glance, I could only understand the first quarter of it. There was still a lot to go, but I could tell that should I realize all of it, that white orb would gain enough power to truly match my brain in ability. It would unlock a whole other realm of cognitive power. And I was about to attempt to understand more of it. I felt like I could understand anything, my mind completely open to absorbing information. In this moment, I was endlessly creative, my mind working in overdrive yet completely comfortable, if not blissful. Almost like a dream. A dream. My thoughts reached a certain point, and with a realization, I came to understand that I was dreaming. After that, everything collapsed. And my eyes opened. I was frozen in my bed. I didn't know where I was, nor did I care. The only thing on my mind was that formation. I wanted to think about it more. It was all there in my mind, just waiting to be looked at and deciphered. But as I thought about it more, the more those feelings disappeared. It was like water in the palm of my hands, unable to be held or contained, constantly slipping away. And when it was all gone, and my eyes finally zoned in to see the roof of my room at the magisterium, I realized it was all gone. Shit. I cursed before shooting up. I reached into my spatial bracelet and took out a sheet of leather. This leather contained the formation for advancing to Authority 4. After thinking about the portion of the information I understood, I realized that it all came from this formation. And as I looked at it, feeling the changes in my mind, I realized that I had just comprehended an entire quarter of this formation in my sleep. I didn't even remember what the first quarter of the formation looked like. If you asked me to draw it out, I'd put down a few lines before giving up. It was too complex to memorize. But it had appeared in my dreams, in its entirety no less. Well, that was the power of the sleeping mind. Something about it made you feel like a savant, but as soon as you woke, all that would slip away. I was no stranger to lucid dreaming. Deliberately causing it wasn't an uncommon thing for me. I was pretty sure most people lucid dreamt occasionally. But it seemed that, with the power of psyche, dreaming could invoke very real changes. It was actually beneficial if used in this way. Unfortunately, it wasn't something I could really control. It was like getting inspired. Things like that just came to you. You couldn't really force it. I suddenly wanted to go back to sleep, anything to go back to that state. But I had already woken, and my mind was feeling euphoric. That white orb of Psyche within my mind was there, acting like a core of energy for my thoughts. I could direct it like electricity. It was a level of control over my thoughts that I wasn't quite sure how to handle. It was like another mind entirely, almost separate from my own. I would imagine this was what growing an extra limb was like. It was a part of you, but separate until you assimilated it. Was this what powerful summoners had at their disposal? If this orb grew to fill my entire mind, how much faster would my thoughts be? I was already beginning to feel like a genius, but taken a dozen steps further, just how amazing would my mind be? No wonder summoners were hailed as the smartest among the magi. I couldn't imagine what would come later. I spent the next long while sorting myself out. It was hard to concentrate when my focus was on using the orb. In one moment, I had the orb focus on comprehending more of the formation before my eyes. But in another moment, I had it focus on scouring my dimensions for weapons and spirits to summon. Whenever I shifted its power, I felt my mind receiving all kinds of information. These were my thoughts, but they almost felt foreign. It wasn't uncomfortable, just disorienting because I couldn't turn it off. But after thinking about turning it off, I realized I could direct it in a more general way. Around the orb that was filled with chaotic shooting stars of beaming Psyche was the rest of my mind. It was like an ocean, one that moved in a slower, more idle current. And within that ocean were many more stars than what was contained within the orb. If I directed the power of the orb outward, it seemed to spread its power out toward the entire ocean. When that happened, I felt a small wave of relief as my thoughts, while still quick, weren't so unnaturally focused. It was hard to keep up with my own mind when it was moving that fast, as weird as that was. After doing that, I took another few minutes just to stew in silence, processing everything. But then, I suddenly raised my arm. When doing so, I felt like I had greater control over even my body, as if I could feel the clusters of neurons activating and enhancing my mind-muscle connection. But that wasn't the point in doing so. I brought up my Ariel, calling my teacher. What? His dull voice echoed in my mind, seemingly not happy with my early morning call. I spoke anyway. Hey. So, I comprehended some of the authority for formation. Congratulations, and goodbye. Wait. I made him stay, throwing out what would interest him. I came to understand about a quarter of the formation all at once, and I did so within my dream. While dreaming, I formed an orb of energy within my mind. It's made things a lot faster. I see. This time, I heard his voice perk up with impression. Seems you've been inspired. And to think you've had a dream at this stage. You're quite lucky. Really? I don't really think it's luck. So you think it's skill? Until I reached Authority 9, I had only dreamt perhaps 3 times in my life. Dreams only become more frequent when a summoner gets more powerful. Pushing toward Authority 10, I had them rather often, perhaps once or twice a week. It's a known phenomenon. In fact, most people will never have a dream at all unless they climb to the higher authorities. I was silent as I contemplated these sudden new facts. On Earth, dreams were common enough. Everyone had dreams. Dreaming every night was normal, even if you didn't remember it. But, to never dream? Was sleep really just a time of darkness and suspension for the people of this world? It was something I never would have thought of. Was that really one of the main differences between this world and Earth? Dreaming? It was fascinating, but if dreams were a time of inspiration that could help a person comprehend magical concepts, then the more I dreamt, the faster I would grow my power. It was a serious advantage, even if an odd one. When I thought about it more though, I also realized it was kind of depressing. Dreaming was the great escape from the harsh realities of life. It made sleep enjoyable, besides being able to rest and recover. And nobody in this world was able to experience the bliss of dreaming about flying. Then again, many dreams were also indecipherable messes that made no sense, but that was beside the point. How sad, I thought. Well, just wanted to let you know. That little orb in my mind is rather amazing, too. Yes. The fact that you've created your first spark is a great boon. Most summoners have to understand the entire formation before being able to start, but it seems you'll be able to cultivate throughout the process of understanding. It will accelerate your growth even further, depending on how well you use it. Wait, the first. There's more? When you reach Authority 9, you will have formed 3, each acting no different from an extra mind when completed. Your talent determines how powerful each spark is, and without enough power, you will be unable to cultivate the next. I don't worry about that with you, so long as you don't squander the gifts you've been given. So work hard. Right. I will. Then goodbye. And take care of yourself on the trip. Click. With those words, Maxwell suddenly hung up. I could feel genuine care in those final words, making me smile a bit. Despite his usually cold attitude, I knew he cared. Otherwise, he wouldn't invest so much in me. Not that I ever planned on taking advantage of it. One day, I would pay back all those that helped me in this life. But that could only wait until I had the power to give them something of value that matched or exceeded their position. After letting out a long breath, I looked at the clock and saw that it wasn't long before I'd have to leave. I then turned my head toward the large chest next to my bed. It looked rough but unblemished, designed to blend in despite its rich and powerful construction. I got up and cleaned myself for the day before getting ready to leave. Opening the chest, I saw that it looked completely normal inside. It had a smooth wood finish that wouldn't damage anything within. But, there was also a hidden button that looked like one of the many rivets that built the chest. I pressed it, and the inner walls fell down to reveal space that shouldn't be there. According to the shopkeep, this chest could contain 3 times its actual size. In order to utilize the extra space, you just needed to push that button and place the items into the newly exposed area. It was no different from placing an item through an invisible wall, which made it disorienting but cool. Nodding to myself, I pushed the button again and the walls came back up, sealing the subspace and making it look normal. After that, I threw all my items into it. Every piece of clothing I owned went into it, along with some other miscellaneous items I had. Once that was done, I properly dressed myself in my standard attire. Pants, a shirt, my overcoat, and some comfortable shoes. Then, I picked up the chest. It was about time to report for departure. One more useful function of the chest was weight reduction. I could activate that feature at will, making it light enough to easily carry. And when it was time to hand it off, I could deactivate it, making it its normal weight. Anything to reduce suspicions. Like that, I headed out. And I wasn't the only one. All fourth years were leaving for this trip, so the entire dorm was active. I passed by several people, all of them carrying chests similar to mine. We all exited the dorms before making our way out to the entrance of the magisterium. John. Along the way, I bumped into Tana and Amara. Tana was lively as usual, but Amara was quiet. She didn't seem like a morning person, and neither was I. So for the most part, we walked in silence, humming and nodding idly as Tana talked along the way. And so we arrived at the entrance to the magisterium. There, we found a dozen carriages and wagons already waiting for us, along with many staff and instructors. Come grab a name tag and attach it to your luggage. Everything will be loaded into the wagons before being taken to the rails for stowage. We were all guided through a process of logging our names and loading our chests onto the wagons. I attached a tag to my own chest with my name on it before tossing the chest into a wagon with a dozen other chests like my own. After that, we were assigned carriages that would take us to the terminal for the rails. Before that though, I looked around. As the minutes passed, more people began to gather. They were all the younger year students, and I suppose their powerful seniors had caught their eyes. It was no secret that the elites and fourth-year students were all famous in the magisterium. I hadn't really noticed because I was new, receiving little to none of that fame. But everyone else around me was more than well known. There was a leaderboard in the magisterium, and those on the leaderboard were known as elites. They were a group of people which had no defining limits. There could be hundreds or only 10. And each of the elites had earned their position through killing scourge beasts. And beside their name was a point counter. The elites earned points based on the number and strength of the beasts they killed. The top elites had a few thousand points. Unfortunately, I didn't know how points were assigned. That would be something I learned when I got to the base on this trip. But regardless, the people who I had been doing scenarios with under the puppet master were all elites at minimum. I was a major exception in their group, as only elites were actually allowed to receive his services. And not all fourth-year students were elites. In fact, last I checked, there were currently only 28 elites. For reference, there were around 140 fourth-year students. I had met most of these elites, at least those who did the scenarios. I heard that some of the elites did training outside the magisterium and never showed, so I had yet to meet all of them personally. But people like Tana, Amara, and Hubert were all elites who I had gotten to know over a few weeks. Outside of classes, they were people I would occasionally stick with, like currently. And we attracted a lot of attention. Hubert wasn't here, so it was just Tana and Amara by my side as we waited. And I couldn't help but notice and feel a lot of younger students staring. Tana snickered as she noticed the attention we were getting. Be careful, John. You might become famous if you keep sticking around us like this. Well, I've never been famous before. At least not in a good way. So it might be fun. What's that supposed to mean? Are you famous in a bad way? I guess that's a matter of perspective. I thought about it for a second. My notoriety in the black markets had both good and bad points that kind of balanced each other out. But considering the threat to my life, I figured it was more bad than good if I had to lean one way. I shrugged and looked over at Tana. Hey, what rank are you again? Rank 15. So you're average. Shut up. At least I'm an elite in the first place. Heh, just wait. How about you, Umara? Rank 8. Hubert is rank 22. But the ranks don't mean too much, mainly because they rely on kill counts. Someone like Hubert who specializes in defense and protection shouldn't have his value measured by something like that. Very true. I nodded in understanding. Hubert was responsible for protecting his team, not killing. So his prowess couldn't be judged by the same standards as an offensive counterpart. But he was still an elite, which spoke to his ability and strength. Now Tana, on the other hand, was a purely offensive elite. That meant she could, for the most part, be judged wholly by her ability to kill. In which case, she was average among the elites. And Amara seemed to be higher among the hierarchy, which wasn't too surprising considering her great utility. That made me wonder how good the number 1 elite was though. I hoped to see them soon. It took a while to pack and organize the entire 4th-year class, so we got to hang out for a while and wake our bodies up. All the while, even more students came crowding over, all watching their seniors get ready to depart. There had to be at least a few hundred students all gathering around the gates. Beep beep. Suddenly though, I heard a beeping sound in my mind. It was a sound I had never heard before, so I was curious and tapped my aerial. And I picked up a call. The name on it said Son. Hello? John. This is Son from Son Industries. I'm on my way, so I need you to stay put. Okay? Click. The call hung up, making me curious as to what this very famous man wanted to do with me. Then again, I still used his experimental aerial, so perhaps it had something to do with that. And about a minute later, a large carriage rolled up to our group. It attracted plenty of eyes because it truly was very large, at least twice as big as the carriages we were taking. The door opened, revealing Son, who I had met several months ago at that auction. He found me and waved. John? Who is that? Tana asked, realizing that this was for me. I just sighed. Son, apparently. Hang on. I'll be right back. Hopefully. I left and walked over to the carriage, boarding and shutting the door behind me. And inside, I was baffled by the sight. Son sat behind a large table, on which were several devices that looked like both magical and scientific instruments which filled the entire carriage. No wonder it was so big. It was a mobile lab. He waved me over. Good to see you again, but I don't want to spend much time out here. Come, I need to add and activate some of the aerial's features for you. Just place your arm here. He pointed to a device, a cradle for the aerial. Taking a deep breath, I just sat down and did what he said. He explained as my arm was locked in, and a few devices went to work opening the aerial and tampering with it. I don't know if you've heard, but there's something we call the web. It's a service exclusively for the newer generational aerials since only they can tap into it. It's basically this invisible information network between all kinds of people. Right now, only the kingdom and some other powerful individuals can open nodes which give access to different services. Anyway, I'm opening your aerial up to this web. I want you to access it as much as you can, for data collection. And I want you to do so while you're at Calatrop Base. I've set up nodes for the kingdom at every major military installation for easy information transfer. It's revolutionary, but it still needs refining. And your aerial is designed to act as a mobile node in order to test out certain functions. Son ranted for several minutes while working on the aerial. And as he spoke and described everything, I started to gain even more respect for the man. He was creating the internet. And phones. And he was doing it all with magic. It seemed to me that, with magic as the hardware, all Son needed to do was figure out the software. Compared to developing physical computers and the like, this was far easier. But regardless, this man was bringing an informational revolution to this world. I couldn't help but let out a sigh of admiration. At the same time, it was rather surreal to be in the presence of someone with such genius and stature. I mean, if I equated him to someone from Earth, he was the head of a billion-dollar company that was changing the world. To even meet someone like that was an honor. It's good that you're leaving like this. I can collect more data. Also, be sure to test out the local communication function when you leave the range of the communication nodes, like while on missions. Alright. Click. With that, my aerial was reassembled and set back into place on my arm. Now, it was a tad bit bulkier with new devices on it, looking a bit more futuristic. Then, I suddenly spoke up, calling on the knowledge from my home world. Hey son, I have an idea. Yes? What is it? He asked while tampering with some more things on his desk, not even lifting his head. I spoke anyway. Well, let me ask first. How do I access nodes using the aerial? You need their specific web address, which is basically their name, and you enter it into the web program that's newly installed. That lets you connect directly to their node and receive the information on it. I see. Well, what if you created something like domains? These domains would basically compile the addresses of every node under it, allowing you to access them like names on a book. They can be divided according to their geographical area, like by city. And people can search these domains for the addresses of the node services, getting descriptive results instead of needing to know the exact address. San went silent, stopping whatever he was doing to listen. I continued. And there can be multiple levels of domains. There can be one domain for a city's nodes, and one domain for all the city-level domains. This would allow you to access every node regardless of location, as well as divide the traffic across different levels for more efficiency. Of course, you'd have to make a repository of every web address, assigning them rules for data transfer across these nodes. We have something like that. San suddenly spoke, cutting me off. We have these repositories for the web addresses, as well as a small system of what you've described as domains. It's in its infancy, but we're working on it before deploying it. We intend to make every web address accessible in some way in the future, using a tool for searching that can aim the user toward a specific node that will give them the data they want via descriptions. For now, however, we are stuck with simpler systems. There are very few nodes, most of them being used for the kingdom's operations such as military communication and magical study. The Magisterium has one of its own for their alchemical and other research programs. But that isn't enough to implement the systems we want or collect data to test them. On top of that, we have issues with data storage within these singular nodes, something we need to optimize and scale. Oh. I nodded, realizing they were further along in the game than I thought. I remembered some details about how the internet worked on Earth. I didn't know many specifics, but enough to know how data moved from one place to another. There were many hierarchies and rules that a computer had to follow set by the internet protocol, so I thought that I could give San an idea about it. But it seemed he didn't need it. I guess you just need to make nodes larger and more accessible then. Yes. More nodes, more aerials, more data, and more functions. And that's exactly what your aerial is helping us work toward. If everything goes according to plan, the technology behind your experimental aerial will become the basis for the mass production and accessibility of nodes. Right. It's impressive work. No, what's impressive is that you were able to come up with ideas about something you hardly know anything about. What you've described is something the people at San Industries have only conceived of after about 3 years of optimization and brainstorming. You're a smart kid. Perhaps when you're done with your career in the military, you can come work under me at my company. Summoners are always welcome researchers. Perhaps. Thank you, San. Sure. Now don't be late for your trip. With a goodbye, I left the carriage, stepping back out into the light. I couldn't help a smile as I arrived back at Tana and Amara's side, thinking about how valuable San's offer was. What was that? Tana asked, causing me to shrug. Not much. Just saying hi to an acquaintance. So you're acquainted with San of San Industries, the creator of the aerial? Well, I was quiet under Tana's scrutinizing eyes, scratching my cheek. Amara muttered in thought. I don't recall there being a noble household going by the name Cooper. I'm not a noble. Then how did you get associated with San? That man actually came to you personally as well. It's not what you think. Enlighten me. Amara got in my face as well. Both were morbidly curious about my relationship with San, which was understandable. But I didn't really want to tell them. I should have kept my mouth shut earlier. I made something up. I just delivered some stuff for him once. Right, you're a delivery man. And apparently you move cargo for one of the richest men in the world. It's not like that. We just crossed paths one time and I happened to get the job. Where could you possibly cross paths with a man like that? I went silent, realizing I was only digging myself a deeper hole. Seriously, Amara really liked to dig for dirt. I plead the fifth. What? What does that mean? It means I refuse to talk. Come on, you can tell me. I'm good at keeping secrets. And digging for them. Please, get off my ass. I put my hand on Amara's face, pushing her away. She took a step back with a small laugh. At the same time, we all heard a shout. All fourth-year students, please board your assigned transports. We depart for the central terminal in 10 minutes. That's us. Tana let out a breath. With that call, the three of us boarded the carriage we were hanging by. We weren't the only ones. Hubert didn't seem to be a part of our group, but there were a few others. 3 more people boarded with us. There were 2 benches within this carriage, so I sat between Tana and Amara, who wanted to be by the windows. The ones who joined across from us were also elites, some I was familiar with. One of them was the only elite who was a summoner like me. He could summon a bear, serpent, and tiger, and we had done a scenario together. His name was Rudin, and he recognized me as soon as he boarded. John, it's good to see you again. You too. We shook hands as he sat down, chatting for a moment before another person boarded. It was a girl and a warlock just like Amara. In fact, they seemed like friends. Hi Amara. Good morning Haley. Haley sat across from Amara. She was a petite blonde girl who seemed lively, and she didn't hesitate to chat with the more reserved Amara. Finally, the last spot was filled by a man. I didn't recognize him at all, making me curious. But the others went quiet at his arrival. As he boarded, he looked around before eyeing me for a moment. I nodded to him, which he returned with the same courtesy before taking a seat beside Rudin, looking out the window. Suddenly Amara lifted her sleeve and tapped her aerial, typing out a message and sending it. I received it momentarily. We had exchanged info a while ago, even if we didn't use it much. That's Phaidon Desmus. He's a noble child of the Desmus Marquis household. He's a knight, ranked 2 in the elites. He's fast and strong, but his biggest asset is his insane spear technique. He's an authority 5 and has reached the enhancement stage where he can imbue weapons with his vigor beyond his body. He could kill you with no more than 2 fingers. Amara's explanation caused me to realize that this man was a big deal. Not only was he nobility, but he was seriously strong. The enhancement stage of a knight was one of the levels that a knight could advance to, and it required skill to achieve, not authorities. Below the enhancement stage was the novice stage, and there, a knight could only utilize vigor within their bodies, doing nothing extraneous with it. Enhancement was the first stage where a knight could bring vigor beyond their skin and into another object. And beyond enhancement was the master stage where a knight could release vigor from even their weapons, creating attacks that could strike from a distance with devastation. And going even further beyond was the king stage where vigor went beyond merely being a destructive energy and gained unique properties. But because so few people ever reached this stage throughout history and, by extension, never studied it, not much was known about it. At least, that's what was taught publicly. It seemed Phaidon truly was talented if he had reached the enhancement stage so early. As far as I knew, none of the Tavera knights I had fought with on that trip were of the enhancement stage except for the captain and that pugilist from the young guild. His vigor was the reason I had a scar on the side of my head. For a while, nobody spoke in the carriage. Everyone seemed pressured by Phaidon for some reason. He just stared out the window, almost like he was used to this kind of treatment. After looking at him for a while, I suddenly spoke. Phaidon, right? Amazing work, being second among the elites. Thanks. After turning from the window and facing me for a second, he nodded with a smile. I've also come to hear about you. John, correct? It's a pleasure. Likewise. We shook hands, and I smiled now that the ice was broken. He seemed nice enough. Then, I asked about something on my mind. I've never seen you at the training grounds run by the puppet master. Do you train elsewhere? Yes. I train under a mentor from my family. Lately I've been focused on advancing my use of vigor instead of combating scourge beasts. Understandable. Sheer power determines who you can even begin to fight. If you can't so much as damage their body, tactics and strategies are useless. Indeed. I can understand why, but many instructors at the magisterium believe more in teaching students combat tactics. It simply doesn't suit me right now, and besides, I've had enough practice against beasts over the years. Phaidon described some of his experiences. It seems that he was already well known for having a high kill count against scourge beasts from all the hunting trips he'd gone on. And at some point, learning to fight beasts simply wasn't as valuable as increasing his power and skill with the spear. And I understood his reasons. I myself had issues with the power behind my guns and bullets. At a certain level, they were useless against knights due to their tough bodies. So it didn't matter how amazing my strategies against an enemy were, if I couldn't pierce their bodies with my bullets, then I couldn't kill them no matter how hard I tried. If not for the fact that I had no experience fighting scourge beasts, I would also have been purely focused on advancing my authority. But because I was inexperienced, I spent all my time at the training grounds. Still, I intended to switch gears soon. After this trip, I should have enough experience along with the puppet master's training. So nothing would be more important than simply advancing my authorities and searching for more spirits to commune with. As I contemplated the near future, Phaidon suddenly asked me a question, continuing our conversation. How about you, John? I hear you're a cold summoner. You made quite the disturbance when you entered. I heard all about you and how you directly entered the 4th year class. Yeah. Because of my age and how I was already Authority 3, I was placed into it. That, along with my summons. Their pure lethality makes them capable of killing above their level. Ah, that's impressive. So this is your first trip, correct? It's a big jump going straight to working with the military. Do you feel prepared? Well, if it's anything like the Puppet Master's scenarios, then I should at least be able to keep myself alive. I shrugged. It wasn't like I had to adapt a spear or sword technique to the behaviors of beasts. My guns were simple. Point and shoot. The only things I had to worry about were my positioning in relation to the enemy and how the sounds from my guns attracted attention. Phaidon nodded. Yes, the Puppet Master is very good at preparing people for the scourge. If you can survive those scenarios, then you should be able to handle yourself on this trip. Good to know. And hopefully, I'll be placed into teams I'm familiar with. I've only worked with the elites, so if I'm thrown into a group with normal 4th years, then I'm not sure how things will go. I wouldn't worry about that too much. The Puppet Master will be overseeing the placement and management of the elites. You'll be placed into a group that he's given you before and with people that work well with you. They can't have us dying, after all, so there's no way he'll put you with completely new people. Oh. Well, thank goodness. I smiled, one of my concerns being taken care of. After that, Phaidon and I continued to chat for the remainder of the ride. Since we were heading to the outskirts of the city where the central terminal was, it didn't take too long. And once we arrived, we got off the carriages before entering the terminal. We were all herded toward one area where our rail was being prepared and our luggage loaded. There was time to hang out. Most people just began talking, but I had my attention directed elsewhere. Looking around, it wasn't long before I spotted Rayla in the crowds. Our huge group was obvious, so she didn't have an issue finding me. Leaving the others, I walked over to her who had a beaming smile. Hey, Rayla. We hugged, and for a moment, I couldn't help but think that we no doubt looked like a couple. She asked once we separated. Everything packed? Yup. Most of what I own is in that chest. Good. How does your body feel? Have you recovered? For the most part. Still a bit sore. Light a cigar then. That rail ride is your last chance to really rest. You'll be busy for the next month. Right. You just need to worry about yourself. I know Maxwell probably gave you things to do, but don't let all that keep you from taking care of yourself. I'll be fine. I spoke reassuringly. Like with the Tavera trip, she was worrying again. And I could only speak to console her. And she let out a sigh. I know. But you know I can't help but worry. The scourge is dangerous. It's not like fighting people, and you haven't had much practice. I've been training against those puppets without rest, so I'm not completely unprepared. Besides, I'm good at staying alive, or I wouldn't have survived the trenches for as long as I did. Yeah, you are good at what you do. But that only scares me more. She suddenly hugged me again. I could only respond in kind. Just worry about your life first. Nothing matters more than keeping yourself safe. Promise me that. All right. I promise. Only if you stop worrying so much. No thanks. That's my right as the one sending you off. I smiled as we continued to hug. It lasted quite a while, both of us simply taking in the other's warmth and comfort. All students, prepare to board. Then, there was a shout. It made me lift my head, and from within my arms, Rayla sighed. I'll miss you, John. I'll miss you too. When I get back, we should head to a restaurant. I doubt the food at a military base is any good. No, it's not like the delicacies of the capital. So I look forward to your return. She smiled at me while we separated. I stared at her for probably a few seconds longer than I should have, taking in the image of her deep red hair, lovely face, and mature body before finally turning away and walking. It was oddly difficult to leave, as if I were leaving her instead of leaving for a trip. I don't know why it felt like that, but it did. But those weird feelings faded when I got back to the group and saw Tana snickering. Who was that, lover boy? A close friend of mine. Aha. That hug was 10 minutes too long to just be friends. Hey, she worries. Besides, she's pretty. I like hugging pretty girls. Ho ho, is that right? Yeah, so don't come looking for me to hug. Ugh. Rude. Tana stomped, causing Amara to laugh as we boarded the rail. I glanced back one more time as we did so, seeing Rayla smiling and waving. I waved once before disappearing into the train, my smile fading before a sigh escaped my mouth. Afterward, we elites were led to one particular car. The place looked like a living space with rows of couches instead of basic chairs. Having been on one of these before, I simply slumped down into a seat. My hand then dug into my coat, pulling out the golden cigar case. Slipping out one of the cigars, I cut the end with the cutter before sticking it in my mouth and lighting it. The lighter device was actually built around a small white crystal, one that heated up and could be placed against the end of the cigar to burn it. It was incredibly easy, but my mind wasn't on that. After lighting it and taking a few puffs, I let out a long plume of smoke which momentarily faded. After putting the case back in my coat, Amara came over with a surprised look. You smoke? It's not a drug type. It helps with physical recovery. Oh. I didn't know they made recovery medicines in the form of cigars. Where is it from? Secret. I directly refused to answer, causing her to pout before taking a seat next to me. The rail should take about half a day to arrive. This base is pretty far then. It's a frontier base, so yeah. Right. Is there a bar in this rail? I asked while standing from my seat, the cigar making my body feel a bit better. Umara looked at me weirdly. Maybe? It's been a while since I've been on a rail. Well, I'm going to look. Umara went silent, but she still got up and followed me. I left the car, going to the others before finding a bar. I took a seat and ordered a drink. Umara sat beside me. And it seems Tana followed since she arrived as well. And another unexpected guest was Fidan. I looked at him with raised brows. You drink? On occasion. I like to taste more than drink. Oh. I like to drink more than taste. I shrugged as he ordered some wine. I got myself something that was similar to tequila, my favorite liquor. And Tana looked around, her eyes curious like a kid seeing something new. I raised my brow. You gonna get something? Oh, I don't know. I've never really drank. How old are you? Old enough. I'm not a kid. She snapped, causing me to raise my hands in retreat. In the end, she went to Amara who also ordered a drink, asking about what she should get. And when she finally got a glass filled with a brown liquid, she looked at it with anticipation. Then, she took a sip, immediately coughing after while shaking her head. Bleg! How do you drink this? In time. Fidan chuckled and chimed while I smirked and tapped Amara. Amara, get her something sugary. Hee hee, okay. Laughing, Amara ordered another drink for Tana. This time, it was a purple color. Tana tasted it warily, and this time, her eyes widened in surprise. This is good. I only taste a bit of the alcohol. That's the point. Just don't drink too much. I don't need to be dragging you into the military base drunk off your ass. I think I'll be fine. Tana smiled while downing her drink and asking for another one. I just shook my head. Like that, the four of us just hung out and chatted. But over time, more people came to find us. First it was Rudin the summoner, then Haley, and then Hubert showed up. And with so many coming over, more people came to check things out. I saw more elites who I had done scenarios with, greeting them all as they took a seat at the bar. Some ordered drinks, others just hung out and socialized. But for the most part, the car turned into a small party, everyone having fun. It lightened my downcast mood, that and the buzz from a few drinks. Well, we had half a day. It was enough time to filter the alcohol from my body. And Tana would surely need it. Hey, Amara. I'm pretty, right? Yes, Tana. You're very pretty. Thank you so much. Hey John. Fuck you. Bahaha. Fidan burst out laughing, his face a bit red as he slammed the table. I sat there stunned. It seemed Tana was an aggressive drunk. Even the bartender couldn't help a chuckle, making me shake my head and ignore her as she went off to try and fight someone. I watched with a smile, letting out long plumes of smoke with my cigar. Makes me feel old. I laughed inwardly, pretending like I was some wizened old man with my glass of liquor in hand and a stogie in my mouth. Another good thing about these cigars was how long they lasted. They didn't burn through quickly. In fact, one cigar could burn for about 30 hours. And I had stocked up before leaving, meaning I had more than enough to last me through the next month. Can I try? Suddenly, I heard Amara speak from the chair beside me. I looked at her for a moment before taking the cigar out of my mouth and passing it to her. Just suck air through it. This really isn't a drug, is it? No. The only drug I use is alcohol. I said that while taking another sip. And after a few seconds of playing with the cigar, Amara put it in her mouth and breathed in. Cough. Ugh. It actually tastes good, but my lungs don't like it. Yeah, mine didn't either at first. But it helped keep me alive, so I got used to it. My body feels good. This has some really good medicinal properties. She looked at it curiously before taking another puff. She held it in a bit longer that time before coughing it back out and handing it to me. So what do you really do? She suddenly asked, causing me to laugh. I told you. I'm a delivery man. I don't know if I trust that. I'm not lying. If you don't believe me, I don't know what to say. I shrugged. I didn't care if she believed me or not. If anything, she was better off not knowing. She glared at me for a few more seconds before gradually turning away. Still, she stuck by my side. I couldn't help but find her a bit cute. Amara was a talented elite, hence why she had earned her position. And she was rather pretty. Her face was sharp, and her wit a bit sharper. Her hair was actually dark gray, like ash. And her signature warlock robes were often either black, purple, or a combination of both. Usually she also carried a staff, but right now, it seemed to be stashed away. I couldn't see any obvious spatial accessories on her body, so they were either covered or integrated into her robes discreetly. Making a spatial device that couldn't be easily found wasn't uncommon, at least in the black markets. At the same time, I couldn't help but wonder about her own background. She tried to pry so often into mine, so I got curious. Are you a noble? Yes. Father? Mother? Title? Duchess Teleria. She resides over the city of Joffrin. I suddenly went silent, my eyes going wide. And then, I laughed. Bahaha. Shit. No wonder I thought that look was familiar. What? You know my mother? Ha. Not personally, but I suppose you could say we're acquainted professionally. I thought back. I had met Duchess Teleria not long before leaving Joffrin. And thinking about it, she really resembled Amara. She was sharp, the color of their hair and clothes were the same, and she enjoyed digging into people's business. We hadn't even met before and the Duchess had asked all about me. It was like she couldn't go without knowing everything about someone, or at least enough to satisfy her curiosity. Like mother, like daughter. They were almost identical. And Amara grabbed my arm, shaking it. How did you meet my mother? In what context? I was finishing a job and we bumped into each other. Heh, she snoops around just as much as you do. I swear, you two are twins. What kind of job were you finishing? Was it that trip you were on? Why did it take you to Joffrin? Not telling. Do you know what kind of business your mother works in? Yes, but she works in several industries. Which one are you talking about? Heh, nice try. I chuckled, causing her to shake me harder. Tell me. If your mom hasn't told you, then I'm not. She'd kill me if she found out I did that. I won't tell. I can't take that risk. Tell me. No. I dodged Amara's glare, refusing to give up the information. If you want to know, figure it out yourself. I'll follow you when we get back to the capital. That might actually be dangerous for you. Why? Secret. I hate you. She said that before snatching the cigar out of my mouth, putting it in hers before walking away. I only laughed as I heard her cough more. After that, the rest of the ride passed smoothly as I chatted up some new friends and avoided a drunkard who we had to eventually pin down to keep her from drinking more. We arrive in 10 minutes. Prepare to disembark. Shouts echoed through the train cars, spurring me from my sleep. After several hours of chatting, laughing, and playing small games, everyone had gotten tired and drifted off to sleep. The entire car with the bar was littered with unconscious bodies. Of course, we hadn't been sleeping for long. In order to pass the time, everyone found something to do. Besides the usual, there was a period when some of the knights sparred. In order to not damage anything, they did something similar to fencing. Over half the elites were knights in the first place, so many went up to challenge themselves and have fun. Even I went up, taking a light sword and utilizing my non-existent sword skill to try and poke the other knight. Even after 5 minutes of trying though, I couldn't so much as touch them. It made for a nice laugh. And after that, the warlocks went up and let out displays of spellcasting. Many of the spells let out were nothing more than parlor tricks, like little sparks of fire or little droplets of water being thrown at the opponent. It was funny seeing the reactions of those who got bit by a spark, only for the other to stumble when their hair was blown back by a sharp gust of wind. Things of that nature filled the ride, and I watched for the most part, a smile on my face. It felt like I was back in college messing around with some friends at a sporting event. And it all helped me realize that, in the end, these people were all just young adults who liked to have fun. The magisterium and the war against the scourge put a lot of pressure on them, especially the elites, but that didn't mean they didn't still want to kick back and let loose. They were only a couple of years younger than me, so I had no issue relating and getting along with them. Most would feel like these elites were unapproachable professionals wholly focused on growing their strength. But what kid was interested in that? They knew how to have fun just like anybody else their age. They didn't suddenly lose their humanity with their talent. So the ride was refreshing for me. I feel like everyone had gotten closer. Just like me, everyone else also woke up with the shouts. We had slept for around an hour or two, a power nap sufficient to revitalize us for whatever was awaiting us at this military base. In the car, bodies littered the couches and floor, all of them slowly rising and stretching. I heard groans and moans, along with a few who didn't actually wake up and continued to snore. One of which was Tana, who I saw passed out in the corner of the room. When I thought back, I couldn't help the laugh. After a few hours of constant drinking, she finally couldn't hold it and left to go vomit. Umara was stuck holding her hair back. But shockingly, after recovering for a bit, she was right back at it. She proclaimed that she needed to build her tolerance, but reality was cruel as she hurled again not even an hour after trying to drink more. After that, we pinned her down and forced her to rest, which ended with her passing out. That was about halfway through the ride. Hopefully she would be recovered enough to walk straight. I thought of that as I went over and shook her. "Hey, Tana." She didn't respond, even after I shook her harder and tapped her face. Then, Amara walked over. "I got it." Splash. She summoned some water, pouring it over Tana's head. And the reaction was violent. "Ah. Stop. Please. Wake up." Umara was rather merciless with her words, but still gently helped Tana up. To my great surprise though, she didn't seem hungover at all. Tana just got up and cracked her neck before letting out a long breath. How long was I out?" "We're here, so you do the math." "I don't like math." "Whatever. I need to pee." With a yawn, Tana walked out of the car in search of a restroom. I stood there, a bit stunned, before connecting the dots. So knights can resist the effects of alcohol. No wonder she could drink so much. Tana had drank non-stop for hours despite her having no experience with alcohol. I suppose it was only her strong body as a knight that allowed her to do that. I sighed in slight envy. How lucky. They can't get hungover. Yes, their bodies are naturally resistant to poisoning. It's why I wasn't worried. Well, how are you doing? Fine, actually. Those cigars help your body filter the alcohol as well, so I'm feeling good. Oh, and here. Umara suddenly handed back the cigar. It was barely a quarter burnt, so I took out my golden cigar case and stashed it for later. The sight of it caused Umara's eyes to widen a bit. After that, everyone gathered in the main car we had first arrived in. There, the instructors were briefing everyone. The orientation will simply consist of the most basic things you need to know. Tomorrow is when you'll receive a tour of the base and get to know your daily routine. Just listen to the commander so he can quickly get you situated in your barracks. The puppet master gave those words, and not long after, we all felt the rail come to a gradual stop. I nudged Amara with my elbow. "Hey, what are the military ranks?" "Oh, I was tested on those." "Hang on." She took a second to think before counting with her 10 fingers. "Ensign, first ensign, corporal, sergeant, master sergeant, first sergeant, commander, chief commander, first commander, and brigadier." "Oh. Those are the infantry ranks in the military, and they go by your authority. The commander we're going to meet would be an authority 7. And the intelligence ranks have different names." "All right." I nodded, and right after, the door to the car opened, revealing the terminal we arrived in. Unlike the one in the capital, this one wasn't fancy or very well kept. The floors were made of gray stone bricks, and across the way from all the rails, there was what looked like a large warehouse with tons of cargo in it, probably stuff that needed to be transported. There were also many troops moving about the plaza. I took a look at the standard uniforms. Because this world's military wasn't facing a human or generally intelligent enemy, there was no need for camouflage. It was likely that such measures would be useless before a beast's senses. Plus, guns and bullets weren't the primary mode of combat. Therefore, entire sets of steel armor were much more important than cloth that could blend into the surroundings. So instead, the uniforms were sets of clothing that, in their most basic setup, were designed to be worn under armor. This meant that they were sleek and generally comfortable to wear. The fabrics of the shirts, for instance, seemed to be some variant of polyester derived from a plant. This made them flexible, smooth, and relatively tough. Some of my sets of clothing were polyester, in fact. And the pants were like jeans, but thinner and more flexible. They were belted and meant to fit nicely under a set of armor. If I had to describe it, they would be a heavy-duty pair of dress slacks. As for the colors, they went by the theme colors of the Kingdom of Dragon Tongue, which were black, white, and blue. The shirt was entirely blue, and the pants were black like formal slacks with blue lines running down their seams. Some were also wearing coats, ones that looked like wool jackets. And then there was the commander in front of us who was wearing a formal overcoat with some medals and badges pinned on it. One of our instructors, a fourth-year teacher who I hadn't met before, went forward to greet him. Commander Bosnan. Instructor Gracia. Welcome to Calatrop Base. They shook hands before the instructor turned to us. All right, students, listen up. Most of your arrangements will be handled by Commander Bosnan here. He is your leader for the duration of your stay here. You will listen to his instructions as if they were orders from us. Besides, in a year, you all will join the military and he will outrank you anyway, so act according to your position. Now, I'll hand you off. Go ahead, Commander. Thank you, Instructor. The commander stepped forward after we had all piled out of the rail. To the side, we could see all our chests and cargo being hauled out and into the base by some other soldiers. The commander looked over each of us before speaking. You all will address me as commander. I have been given authority by the first commander overseeing this base to take care of you all while you are here. This means you are my responsibility, and my words will therefore dictate the next month of your lives. Failure to follow orders will result in suspension for the rest of your trip as well as rigorous training designed to promote reflection and introspection. Am I clear? Yes, Commander. I spoke in response, along with the rest of the group. They all seemed familiar with this kind of environment, and they had indeed been to these places plenty of times before. Starting in the third year, students would work alongside the military. That was because most students graduated after their third year, so it was designed to help them get familiar with working at a military base in advance. This meant that all these fourth-year students around me were no strangers to a military environment, responding and acting properly. Many backs had already been straightened, including mine. The commander also seemed to know this since he didn't yell and wasn't making us scream in response to his words. There was no need to drill these things into us. The third years, on the other hand, would likely go through a period of training designed to teach them the basics of operating at a military base. They would be yelled at, have to yell in response, and would need to move about in strict ways. I was glad I didn't have to go through that, skipping straight to the good stuff. Follow me, and we will assign your rooms. The commander turned, the students all following without bothering to look at their instructors. Right now, this commander had the greatest authority. We walked into the base, and I took everything in as we went. The entire base was designed in a hemispherical way. The walls were arched in the front with 4 sections separated by towers. At the base of the hemisphere, it tapered off and circled around a massive fort. The fort was built in the rear portion of the base, separated from the walls by 3 distinct fields. In the midst of these fields were all kinds of things separated by their purpose. For instance, in one field there was a bunch of training equipment. In another was combat equipment like armored vehicles and caches of supplies. And another was filled with structures attached to the walls, likely for extra security. And attached to the side of the fort were a few large structures, likely the barracks. During our walk there, nobody spoke a word, so I didn't either even though I had questions I wanted to ask Amara. Finally, we arrived at one of the buildings. The commander spun around and spoke. This is the male barracks. Just as a forewarning, any fraternizing between the men and women will result in suspension. I'm sure you all can keep it in your pants for a month, so please don't put us in an awkward situation. A few people chuckled, one of them being Amara. Her weird smile made me snicker. Then, we all saw some wagons roll over, their backs loaded with all our chests. All right, all the men, grab your luggage and head inside. Pick any room and bunk you want. Each room holds 2 people. And ladies, follow me." The commander waved all the women over. Umara nudged me as she left, making my brows raise. We seemed to be getting quite close. After watching their backs for a moment, I turned and found Fiden. With a smile, I smacked his shoulder. "Hey, let's room together." "Oh, all right." He easily agreed, and we went to find our chests. I quickly found mine, grabbing it before heading inside. The entry door led into a long hallway, which I walked down with Fiden behind me. "Which one?" "I suggest the ones around the middle. Not too close to the entrance where the commander comes banging on your door, and not too close to the bathrooms where everyone is constantly coming and going." "All right. Middle it is." Picking a room in the center of the hallway, I opened the door and walked in. The small room I entered had 2 beds on either corner across the way, as well as a single bench, table, 2 chairs, and 2 dressers to store items. Everything was generally worn out. The floor was wooden and there was a single light in the center of the ceiling. No luxury to speak of. I sighed, thinking that I had taken my extravagantly luxurious room at the Black Spider Hotel for granted. The only thing worse than this would be living outside or in a tent. As for the bed, when I pressed on it, my hand didn't sink down. It was pretty stiff, with a wood base and thin mattress filled with who knows what. The pillow wasn't much better, and there was only 1 sheet and 1 wool blanket. I was quickly figuring out that I packed light. Hell, I should have brought an entire bed. I might have if I knew this piece of crap was waiting for me here. And naturally, Fiden was prepared. He had his own pillow and set of blankets that he draped over the bed. Seeing me glance over there, he turned to me and smiled. "Would you like a blanket?" "No, that's fine. Live and learn, right?" Haha, indeed. I remember my first time on a base. Stressful and unaccommodating was how I'd describe it. Sounds about right. I chuckled and took a seat on the bed. At the very least, it looked and smelled clean, so they weren't making me sleep in used sheets. Not long after that, we heard one of the instructors call all the men. Heading out of our room, the instructor let us know about some things for the following day. Things like where the cafeteria was, where the bathrooms were, where we needed to report the next morning and when. After that final briefing, we were all allowed to finally retire for the night. Tomorrow, there was a lot waiting for us. The next morning, I woke up bright and early to an alarm from my Ariel. And that wasn't the only thing I got. After rolling over and spending a few minutes to wake up, I tapped the device and saw that I had a message. It was from Rayla, and attached was an image. My brows raised as I opened it. The picture was from the auction that came at the end of every month. However, I suddenly remembered that not only was this auction last night, but it was the major auction accompanied by Vatsy's gala. I suddenly sat up. I missed the gala. Damn it. I cursed while palming my forehead. I obviously knew I couldn't go, but what a shame. I had only been to 1 gala before, and it was an amazing experience. Taking a moment, I started to count the months, and after some basic addition, I realized that I wouldn't have to miss the next one that would occur at the end of the year. I sighed in relief and slumped back down into my bed again. "What's this gala?" Then, Fiden asked with drowsiness. I had woken him up. I spoke while sighing. "Just a party. It's pretty fun, but it doesn't happen very often." "I see." He nodded and yawned before climbing out of bed. "I suggest you use the bathrooms before everyone else does. It gets crowded and smelly." "True." Following, I grabbed some items before strolling to the bathroom. It was a large tiled space with stalls, shower curtains, and lots of metal bowls. Basic but functional. And we weren't the only ones to wake up a bit earlier. The few male instructors, including the puppet master, along with some other guys, were already there and getting ready for the day. Everyone was quiet, just minding their own business. Nobody was in the mood to chat so early in the morning. I went through my morning routine, but as I was brushing my teeth, I suddenly remembered the picture Rayla sent me. I quickly pulled it back up. And I couldn't help the grin that surfaced. There were actually 2 pictures. The first was of Rayla and the others like Plex, Libitus, and Tovex. They stood stiffly in a group, everyone smiling except Plex, who was too busy drinking. And the second picture was of Rayla by herself, dressed in a rather sexy black outfit and blowing a kiss into the picture. I got a nice shot of all the goodies, by design. Well, isn't that something? I laughed before closing it, going through the rest of my morning with a smile. She sure knew how to cheer me up. Then, not long after finishing my routine, I heard some shouts that shook our building. Be ready in 15 minutes and assemble outside the barracks. It was our commander, and his shouts woke everyone who wasn't already out of bed. After that, the bathrooms and hallways were flooded as everyone rushed to get ready. On the other hand, Fiden and I took our time and headed outside. I enjoyed the morning breeze cooling my face. My coat never allowed me to get cold or hot, so the wind felt refreshing instead of making me shiver. Seeing as how Fiden and I were the only ones out, I grabbed the golden cigar case from my inner pocket. After lighting the quarter-used cigar, I took a few deep breaths of smoke, feeling the rejuvenating effects that washed away some of my drowsiness and woke me up. Not long after, people began filing out of the barracks, gathering outside. Not far from us outside the building adjacent to the male bunks, we could see all the girls gather, the two sides peeking over at each other. Then, the commander came, gathering both groups before announcing, "All right, listen in. We're going to guide you through your routine for the next month. I'm going to give you all a tour of the places you need to know and remember. We are also going to assign everyone their squads. These squads can change at any time, but likely won't unless there is good reason. So be prepared to get familiar with them. Now, follow me." The commander waved, and everyone followed him into the command center of the base. Upon arrival, I looked around and saw various facilities and many officers carrying out their duties. To my surprise though, not many of them were powerful. Some officers were completely ordinary. Well, I suppose it shouldn't have been surprising. Behind every soldier were a dozen logistical officers. It took no small amount of manpower to operate the war machine, and it couldn't possibly be entirely composed of magi. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some kind of draft or mandatory service for everyone. After entering the command center, the commander briefed us on several of the facilities. One was an intelligence post, the officers within being responsible for gathering and analyzing the movements and patterns of the scourge near the base. They were also responsible for collecting intelligence gathered by squads that went on reconnaissance missions and making sense of it, compiling it all into actionable data. Then, there was the office sector, a large area devoted to the bureaucratic side of the base. Here, many officers were busy filling out tons of paperwork and collecting mission reports from the various squads. Then there was an area that held several briefing rooms. Inside these rooms were magical projectors and devices that could display information pertaining to a mission. Before being sent out on a mission, we would come here to get a rundown. After that, we toured the rest of the base. We were introduced to the mess hall where breakfast, lunch, and dinner were served at regular intervals. We were taken to the medical building, a place many never wished to get familiar with. Then there was the armory where we could get supplies, some recreation centers for entertainment, a training facility for physical fitness, a maintenance facility for gear, and a storage area for miscellaneous items. There was even a chapel for the believers. The commander spent several hours giving us this tour, and we also met several key officers who would be helping us during our stay. We were barely done before lunch came around. At that time, the commander finally let us go to the mess hall and get some chow. Everyone flooded into the building, and I noticed that everyone was generally familiar with everything. And I had no issue simply following in their footsteps, getting myself food. It wasn't a buffet. There was a long line of pots and trays with various foods in them, and there was a limit to how much you could take of each one. But you could indeed go back for seconds and thirds. At first glance, I didn't recognize most of the food. It didn't look particularly appetizing, but I knew that was coming from my perspective as someone who almost always ate out at restaurants. Still, I grabbed from the trays that smelled better than the others and soon had a full plate. I went and took a seat at an empty table. How sad, sitting by yourself. Umara came up behind me, taking a seat on my right. With her was Tana, and Fiden arrived not long after. I smiled at her and started eating. At the same time, I asked a question on my mind. What kind of positions do ordinary people occupy in the military? They are intelligence. There are two ranking systems in the military, one for infantry, and one for intelligence. There are no power requirements for intelligence, unlike infantry. But they do have to be educated. The kingdom has several schools specifically for training and teaching those officers. That's what I thought. This is rather common knowledge, but you don't know it. Did you entirely skip the first few years of classes at the magisterium? But even then, you learn some of these things during school when growing up. Umara looked at me from the side, going on another one of her deductive rabbit holes. Where did you grow up? Far from here. What city? It was a village, called Ymir Village. Really? That's surprising though. You don't look like you've come from a village. And you're too educated to not have gone to a proper school, which only exists in cities. Look at you, sniffing around for more secrets. Am I that interesting to you? The fact that your origins are a secret does in fact make you very interesting. She gave me a grin, causing me to laugh. This girl really did like digging into my business. But I also couldn't help but notice the others nodding with thoughtful expressions. Seriously, Amara was turning me into some kind of hot topic, as if my existence here was some kind of conspiracy. Well, it kind of was. But that was beside the point. After dodging more of Amara's sneaky questions, lunch finished and we were given some free time to explore. However, we were also given some sheets which informed us of our squads. Everyone gathered and read the lists, and chatter ensued. I quickly found my name and read the names of those I was grouped with. Fiden, Amara, Vetsman, and Tana. Not a bad lineup, but I don't know who Vetsman is. I smiled. Besides this Vetsman who I didn't know about, the group was perfect. Fiden and Tana were knights who were skilled in handling enemies up close. The two of them would be able to keep everything away from Amara and me while we supported them from behind. And Amara alone was a great partner to have by my side. She knew many utility spells, including some area spells and spells that compensated for the weaknesses of my guns, like their sound. Oh, Vetsman. It seems we have nothing to worry about. After reading it, Fiden nodded from beside me, causing me to ask. Who is that? Why don't you greet him yourself? He pointed, and I looked over. Hubert was a stocky man, tall and built like a football linebacker. I had thought he was on the bigger side, but this Vetsman almost put him to shame. Well over 6 feet tall, Vetsman walked over with a towering figure that looked down on even me. I could see his muscles through the white robes he wore, and his aura was awfully threatening. He was someone who I'd never met before, likely one of the topmost elites who we never saw much of. His skin was a deep brown and he had long black hair that took nothing away from the sharp jawline and raging masculinity. It was like he radiated testosterone. He walked up to me, seeing as how my focus was on him. And being completely honest with myself, I felt a bit inferior in front of his hulking figure. But I still straightened my back to greet him, putting out my hand. You're Vetsman? Yes. John, right? I've heard about you. Nice to finally meet you. He smiled, exposing his pearly white teeth while shaking my hand with his bare paws. I couldn't even close my grip, and my strength was naturally far below his. He was a knight through and through. But his robes reminded me of something else. Why did they resemble priest robes? Maybe I was just overthinking it and this guy just really liked fancy white clothing. After our greeting, Vetsman went around to the others to exchange pleasantries. As a group, we would need to get familiar with each other. Trust was one of the most important factors of any team. It seemed Vetsman was a good guy. Nobody had any trouble talking to him. And while he was talking to the others, Amara came over to me and whispered in my ear. He's rank 4, a knight specializing in defense and protection like Hubert. He's seriously strong, and with you, our group has basically no weaknesses. In fact, we could very well be one of the most powerful groups on this trip. Rank 4? The puppet master seems to think highly of me. I couldn't help but smile a bit. I wasn't even an elite yet, and I was being grouped with people in the top 10. Amara was 8th, Vetsman was 4th, and Fiden was 2nd. While Tana was our weaker link, she was still ranked 15 out of 28 elites. And she specialized in speed anyway, not sheer strength, so she should be able to fill some gaps in our composition. For example, she would probably end up our scout. I couldn't help but think that despite not being an elite, the puppet master was treating me as one in the upper echelons of the group. And at the very least, I knew that I could pull my weight. After all, I had been training with all the elites for the past several weeks. If I couldn't keep up, I probably would have been kicked out a while ago. From the side, Amara smiled at me. I can confidently say that you're one of the most powerful people in the elites. Your guns are amazingly lethal, making you too good at killing things. So if you're allowed to do as you please, only an overwhelmingly tough enemy would survive. This group is practically built to protect you. Well, even without me, it would be a powerful group. Yes, but with you, it's even more so. I hummed, glancing at Amara before nudging her with my elbow. She nudged me back with a stifled giggle. After that, we were called by the rest of the group, gathering together to discuss some things. I had worked with Tana and Amara several times, so I knew them and their skill sets well. But I didn't know much about Fiden despite the fact that we had become good friends recently, and Vetsman was still a mystery even though he looked about as reliable as someone could ever be. So for now, we talked about each other's abilities, strengths, and weaknesses, quickly understanding everything our group was capable of. And in the end, we came to the conclusion that there wasn't much that we weren't capable of. Vetsman utilized a tower shield befitting his large body and strength, capable of going toe-to-toe with Authority 5 beasts. His weapon of choice was a spear, but he could also use a sword for when he wasn't being weighed down by his shield, making him very versatile. And Phaidon was naturally a swordsman who excelled in both speed and strength. He basically had Tana's strengths and none of her weaknesses while possessing amazing technique. And then there was me. I laid out my abilities and weaknesses clearly. After all, I needed to be protected to some extent. I couldn't let them think that I was perfectly fine on my own and then get killed out of carelessness. After describing my guns and how they worked in principle, Vetsman and Phaidon were able to come to an understanding. And with all our abilities on the table, everyone was able to come to a conclusion as to how we needed to operate. Suddenly, I thought of something humorous. Back on Earth, as a boy in the prime years of his life, I had played no shortage of video games of all kinds. And as I worked with more people, I couldn't help but recall my experiences in those games to help me with forming a battle plan in my mind. Some video games required you to engage in quick yet strategic decision-making, have good pattern recognition, and know how to use the skills, powers, and environment at your disposal to fight for the best outcome. All my training with the Puppet Master's scenarios had forced me to utilize all these things, but the fact that some random video games could help me with real-life battles was a funny concept. Anyway, after a bit more conclusive discussion, we determined that Vetsman would be the core of our formation. His direct support would be Phaidon while Tana would drift between everyone. Umara and I would be paired in the back. She was responsible for ensuring that I could operate at full capacity, and I would be responsible for protecting her while also providing ranged firepower for the rest of the team. Of course, our strategies would have to change according to the enemy and terrain, but we knew our jobs, which was most important. Since we had our team, and everyone got along just fine, we decided to move around together. We had been introduced to all the facilities of the base, but there were still some things we needed to know. For one, we had to know about certain protocols. For the most part, they were standard. After all, this was the military. There would be very few times when protocols deviated from what was in the book. Still, after we had some free time, the commander came back and gathered us together. For the next few hours after that, he went over all the necessary protocols. Specifically, he explained what we needed to do when missions arose. For the time being, we wouldn't be sent out by ourselves. Each squad would be paired with another soldier from the base who would primarily be responsible for navigation and general oversight. After all, the soldiers here knew the lay of the land much better than us. When the time came for a mission, everyone would gather in the briefing room before being assigned a task that would involve us going beyond the walls and out into the wilderness. After our briefing, we would be given supplies for the mission. This included packs of food, water, medical supplies, and other equipment we would need. And after gathering everything we needed, everyone would meet at the gates for final preparations before heading off. Then after returning, there was a process of taking damage reports. Injuries, loss of equipment, expenditures, and other miscellaneous things would be logged before we could retire. That was basically the gist. I couldn't really bother to hear the extensive details, and it didn't seem like the commander cared too much about making sure we knew. After all, this wasn't our first rodeo. With that, the day gradually came to a close. Missions would be assigned in cycles. This meant that different squads would go out on different days. Also, not every mission would involve killing something. Sometimes it would be a perimeter patrol, and sometimes it would be a search and destroy mission. If things got really exciting, then this base would be raided by a wave of beasts and we would need to help defend. But the chances of that happening were low since this base wasn't located on the true front lines of the war front. This place was merely here to fill in gaps and make sure that enemies didn't slip through. We also needed to clear anything that tried to nest and develop itself between the cracks, making sure our allies in distant lands didn't have to worry about being attacked from the sides or back. So there wasn't a whole lot of action. And while there were still frequent hunting missions, they would be split between all the squads, not leaving much for any single group. Well, I was completely fine with that. I still had yet to kill a real scourge beast. I didn't need to jump straight into a frontal battle. Easing my way in was preferable. Like that, we ended our second day uneventfully. The night concluded after everyone had eaten dinner and went back to the barracks. The next day, we were supposed to receive our first orders. A schedule would be given, and the puppet master had said that the elites were going to be some of the first to deploy on real combat missions. So I went to sleep with excited anticipation. I wasn't all that fearful, especially since my squad was damn powerful. I woke up at some point during the night, not to my aerial alarm, but to a weird feeling. I didn't really sense anything other than a faint omen in the back of my head. My heart was also beating pretty hard, enough to send noticeable tremors through my bed. I sat up, remaining there for several minutes. And then, I heard it. Whir. An ear-piercing alarm suddenly sounded through the whole base. Phaidon instantly woke, as did everyone else who had functional hearing. His eyes widened as he looked at me. That's not good. No shit. I frowned while jumping out of bed. I had a hunch as to what was going on. There was really only one thing that could send this entire base into high alert. Sure enough, I heard several shouts outside the barracks. Enemy attack. All hands to battle stations. I could hear a commotion outside as all the soldiers on base instantly jumped to the call, rushing out to get ready. I decided to arm myself for battle as well, equipping my standard gear for when I would train. The coat was the last thing to go on as Phaidon and I ran out of our room with the others. All students, gather here. I heard the puppet master shout, catching everyone's attention with a light that appeared over his head. Right now, the sun was just barely peeking over the horizon. It was dark, but just light enough to see clearly. Still, the beacon drew us to him. The girls and boys gathered as all the soldiers ran past us. He spoke with utter seriousness. This is not a drill. The base is about to come under siege, and all of you are about to become important defenders. It's time to step up. Find your squads and gather before the gates for further instructions. Elites, stay behind. Everyone else, get moving. With his command, a vast majority of the students ran off toward the gates. As for us elites, we stuck around as he gave out more commands. Listen up. I want all the warlocks to head up the walls. I will be up there and will be your commanding officer for this battle, so listen to my orders. As for the knights, you will report to the commander and get ready to engage in close combat. So if you haven't already, get your damn armor on and move. Go. With those words, everyone turned and ran off, including the puppet master. Before we got far though, he shouted again. John, I'm giving you full autonomy, so get into the central tower and start raining hell. Yes sir. Omara, go with him. Understood. We both smiled and ran off. During our tour of the base, we had gotten familiar with the walls. They were designed to defend against sieges like this, and there were 5 primary towers spread evenly along the walls that acted as defensive shooting positions for warlocks. And in the middle was the largest central tower. It had several levels and overlooked the entire base. It was the perfect vantage point for someone like me. Omara and I rushed up there along with dozens of other soldiers. Many of them were yelling and screaming orders, and at some point, we could hear explosions. After some time and squeezing through people, we climbed up the staircases and got to the top of the wall. That's when we took a second and looked over. In the distance, we could see a dark wave of beasts surging toward us. They were a thick tide that quickly covered any visible ground. It was a bit overwhelming, seeing that many beasts rushing toward us. I really wondered what I could do here. In situations like these, warlocks who could cast area of effect spells were the most effective. But I knew I was still valuable. That was especially when I saw some of the much bigger beasts in that ocean of monsters. They would no doubt be my targets. My guns did a lot of damage but only to singular targets, so they would be the best to focus on instead of just firing randomly into the crowd. Let's go. Omara pulled me along, helping me focus. Like that, we rose to the top of the central tower. From there, I could overlook everything. Who are you guys? Where is your commanding officer? Not long after we got there though, we were suddenly yelled at by a soldier. He seemed to be someone with a high rank, a powerful warlock from my guess. But I didn't know him and didn't particularly care right now, so I responded succinctly. We're students under the puppet master's command. He's ordered us to be here and give long-range support. Puppet master. Fine. Just don't get in the way. Otherwise I'm sending you down. Understood. Glad that this guy wasn't making things difficult, I moved with Omara over to an empty window. The inside of this tower was built with warlocks in mind. So not only did it have a great vantage point, but the firing windows were large and plentiful, yet built in a way that would still protect us. There wasn't a single part of the battlefield that I wouldn't be able to shoot. Like that, we set up and got ready. Even as the monsters approached, I could see dozens of spells being launched into the distance. All of them exploded inside the monster tide, most creating flames and disrupting their momentum. Not only that, but there were special weapons used along the walls, cannons to be exact. Of course, these weren't generic cannons but special ones utilizing magic. They were built with enchantments and could launch huge balls of fire that would explode like a bomb. Of course, it couldn't fire quickly, but they lined the walls and were operated efficiently. Like that, holes were punched in the advancing armies. Still, they blindly charged forward. Up above, I took out my sniper, getting into a comfortable position and looking through my scope. I took a close look at the monsters. And they were grotesque. They looked like mutated abominations. Tigers with spines shooting out of their backs, bears with bone spurs jutting out of its body, lizards with irregular scales that made them seem like a bed of razors, and many other monsters I couldn't recognize. Of course, some looked more normal than others, but it was clear that the scourge really was just a monstrous collection of unintelligent creatures. They thirsted for nothing but destruction and human flesh. Some were more mutated than others, and these were the stronger creatures. Not only that, but a larger size generally meant more power, so there were many large monsters that stood a few heads above the rest. It was clear that the puppet master dialed down the grotesque looks for us in training, but otherwise, they looked and operated exactly how I'd known. Otherwise, what use was his special training? After finding the familiarity, I calmed myself and spoke. Umara. Yes. How long can you kill the sound? If I focus on nothing but that spell, I can do so for several hours. Could you? I asked, not doubting if she actually could, but if she was willing to do so. To simply cast a single spell for several hours was no doubt boring and tedious. It might be fine for the first hour, but after that, she would end up just sitting by me and doing nothing but supporting me. But without her spell, I would draw too much attention. It didn't matter how much was going on. My guns were simply too loud and pulled the attention of everything within a mile. That meant this tower would be attacked and I wouldn't be able to work. But if nothing could hear me, then I would be a silent killer. The battle would continue as normal while I simply killed everything I laid eyes on. I felt bad asking her for this, but thankfully, she didn't seem to mind much. Sure. I'll support you. Just do what you're good at. Thank you. I smiled at her, and after getting a smile in return, I turned around and focused in. A moment later, I heard the surrounding noise turn muffled. This was the normal effect of her sound spell, especially when she confined it to a small space. After all, I was the only person she needed to muffle. The windows in this tower were placed nicely. I was actually able to lay down and aim through some windows near the floors. These windows were meant to provide a line of fire down toward the base of the walls. Steadying my weapon on the ground and pointing the barrel through the window, I took aim at one of the big enemies. It was several meters tall, towering over the others nearby, and making it a large but tough target. And without empowering any of my shots, I fired. Zip. My subsonic rounds produced untraceable sound as they pierced into the face of that behemoth. The massive beast had naturally tough armor that almost looked like rock, so I aimed for its only vulnerability. Several spells had already exploded on its body harmlessly, the beast continuing to truck forward. But as soon as the bullet landed, it recoiled in shock. Roar. It let out a pained bellow as the round scrambled its fleshy face, shattering what little armor it had around its eyes and mouth. However, it didn't do any real damage, that much I realized. So with that shot as the gauge, I empowered the rifle and corrected my aim just slightly. Zip. Scree. This time, the beast let out a scream as the bullet accurately hit its eye. Blood exploded from the wound as it thrashed around in pain. I didn't let up, firing more into its face with increasingly powerful shots. And after around a dozen more bullets, the beast finally fell, crashing into its surrounding army and crushing several of its kin. I took a long breath after that, settling myself before finding another. As time passed, the army in the distance only grew. Even though I could see the end of it, there were still thousands of these beasts moving toward us. And among those armies were a few dozen massive behemoths. They marched alongside the smaller ones, giving off a grave presence. That one behemoth I killed took a good amount out of me. Empowering that many shots, especially ones that could kill a beast such as that, consumed great amounts of my psyche. But after I had created the spark with my cultivation in Dreamland, I had gained a great amount of passive psyche regeneration. The spark initially only seemed to boost my cognitive power, but psyche was directly tied to the mind and its thoughts. This meant that, the more powerful my mind, the more powerful and plentiful my psyche. So the spark, which acted as an engine for my mind, afforded me greater power regeneration. I hadn't gotten the chance to really test it since I immediately left for this trip, but now, I would be putting it all into action. Without much rest, I took aim and fired at another behemoth, working to bring it down. And without realizing, I happened to be helping this base much more than I initially realized. Roar asterisk. Another behemoth fell, marking the 13th that I had killed. Of course, doing so took hours and all the energy I had. What had initially been morning turned into afternoon. Now, the sun was beginning to lower, bringing us into evening. I had only left twice during the day in order to eat once and take a piss. Otherwise, I had been laying inside the central tower the entire time. And Amara had never left my side. Operating her sound spell, while tedious and boring, wasn't that difficult for her. If anything, she utilized this time as a training opportunity. At the very least, I was working harder, so I could confidently say that I wasn't wasting her support. But I was reaching my limit mentally. I had gone through my entire psyche pool a few times over, constantly regenerating and using any dregs of power I got when I got it. I had basically been running on empty for half the day. And it was when I hit my 13th kill that I finally couldn't hold on anymore, the gun disappearing from my hand as I could no longer maintain the communion. I grunted as I felt my head throb. Thankfully I wasn't also focused on surviving. With the tower and this many warlocks around me, I didn't have to worry about getting hit even if spells were launched at us. I just laid there, and a few moments later, I suddenly heard the surroundings get louder. Now that Amara wasn't muffling sound, I could hear everything clearly. Unfortunately, it also hurt my head to suddenly get an influx of sound. Come on. Let's get you into the bunks. You've done enough. I heard Amara mutter as she helped pull my body up. I initially wanted to refuse her help, but when I started to get to my feet, my headache multiplied until my vision blurred and the dizziness threatened to throw me off my feet. Amara slung my arm over her shoulder as I became unsteady, using her body to prop mine up as I finally stood. Given several seconds, I started to acclimate and feel better, but my mind was still drained of all its energy. We left the tower, making our way down the walls. And as we did so, there was a sudden shout. Damn, John! Where was that during training? The puppet master appeared in front of us, marching over with a wide grin. It was uncharacteristic of him to be so excited. Hey, do you know what authority those monsters were? No. Authority 5. You just killed a dozen of those things. Congrats on officially becoming an elite. Now go get some rest. Amara, take care of him. Yes sir. Amara shouted back before continuing to carry me back down. She spoke as we finally descended the wall. Killing an Authority 5 Scourge Beast earns you the title of Elite. It's usually done as an Authority 4 and is a sign that you're really talented since you can kill above your authority. Normally, you need to kill it by yourself, have witnesses, and there needs to be a consensus that you unilaterally contributed to its death. But since you just killed a dozen, there's no need for that. Amara explained as we crossed the field, smiling at me as she finished. I've only ever killed 7, so congrats on becoming one of the top elites in a single day. It's just another Tuesday. How humble of you. She giggled as we arrived at the male barracks. Directly bringing me inside, I pointed her to my room. We entered and I was laid on my bed. After getting comfortable, I seemed to become more aware of my headache as it shook my brain. I also felt like I was going to pass out any second. For a moment I got worried since this base was still being sieged by monsters. But I knew that I had contributed as much as I could. I just had to trust that everyone else would be able to hold on. Before I even realized it, my body shut itself down without warning. Everything went dark, and I no longer felt any pain. A magic formation filled my mind. At its center was a single orb of fleeting lights that spun fast in orbiting patterns, yet slower than they should have been. I recognized it almost instantly, yet with some willpower and tricking my own mind, I maintained a suspended sort of awareness of what was going on. I focused on the formation. Its outer edges were all bright, indicating my comprehension. As for the dark parts that moved toward the center, I slowly started to analyze them as my focus moved along the lines. However, unlike the first time, my analysis now was far slower. It felt like I really had to focus on understanding it in order to make progress as opposed to last time when it all just came to me. Not only that, but some parts were indistinguishable. I felt like I could see them, but when I focused on them, they simply slipped my mind. I moved on from those parts, focusing on what I could as I made my way around the formation. And over time, the stars of Psyche that filled my mind began to converge. A few stars made their way into the spark at the center, adding to its power. With every star, I felt the spark make my mind more sensitive. However, because of my recent battle, the spark was drained and begging for replenishment. This made things progress slower. But that was also an unexpected boon. If the spark replenished itself faster, then I would have less time in this dream to work on the formation. On the other hand, the less energy it had, the slower my thoughts were and the slower my analysis was. It was an equal balance between energy and speed, both of which increased over time and yet decreased the time in the dream. I quickly caught on to this as the spark continued to replenish itself faster and faster, my focus becoming sharper yet my dream beginning to slip away. It got to the point where I even had awareness of my body despite still being in the dream, yet I hung on for as long as I could. And finally, I felt the dream shut down completely. Even with my eyes closed and my body unmoving, I knew that it had ended. My eyes fluttered open as I felt the changes. Before, I had comprehended a quarter of the formation. Now, that was about 35%, and my speed of thought had been enhanced accordingly. Now, it was 1.5 times faster. Everything else rose proportionally to that, like the amount of Psyche I had in its passive regeneration. Plus, my mind now felt sharper than ever. I had recovered completely from that day of battle. Looking back, I really put everything I had into it. The monsters had been charging with undeniable momentum, so perhaps I felt afraid for both myself and those knights below me, but I didn't hesitate to pour out all of my power. Some behemoths were stronger than others. A few took an entire hour each to kill, while some were easier. But no matter what, I had reached and surpassed my limits. Turns out, that also helped put me into dreamland for longer periods. Unfortunately, it seemed that I would need to analyze the formation while awake in order to give myself material to work with while dreaming. I remembered those blurry messes blocking my progress, and it was obviously a lack of information. Dreamland wasn't omniscient. I needed to give it fuel to burn, but at least now I had some advantages to make use of. At some point, I opened my eyes and looked around. I could see light stream through the window of my room, making me think that it was the next day. I had passed out around evening when the sun was setting, so 12 hours of sleep would put me around morning of the next day. But when I stood and opened the ragged curtains, I saw that the sun was actually setting. Oh! Lifting my wrist, I activated my aerial and saw the time. I had slept for over 20 hours. Rumble. At that moment, I felt my stomach churn. It was completely empty, and I was starving. I also felt my parched mouth. Quickly taking out a water container, I downed the entire thing. Ugh, I need food. I groaned as my stomach screamed for food, the water aggravating it. Leaving my room, I left the barracks and went over to the mess hall. Along the way, I saw people along the walls continuing to battle. The sight made me want to go over and fight, but I had to take care of myself first. My steps were hasty as I made my way by the kitchen, swiping a tray and filling it with whatever looked edible. I could barely even wait as I did that though, directly stuffing some smaller items like slices of bread into my mouth while grabbing more. Nobody said anything, so I didn't care much and turned around to find a nearby table. Then, I heard a voice. John. I froze and looked up with a face full of bread, finding Amara sitting with the rest of our assigned squad. They waved with a smile. Unfortunately, my hands were too full to return the greeting, so I just walked over and sat down. Tana laughed as I did so. I know you just became an elite, but did you really have to sleep for an entire day? I stared at her silently while chewing my bread. This took several seconds, during which everyone waited for my response. Once I swallowed, I spoke. How many Authority 5s have you killed? Ouch. Heh, he got you there. Fiden and Vetsmond smiled as they commented, making Tana lash out. Hey, who said we were comparing scores? Nobody. He just asked you a simple question. But there was an implication. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't play dumb. Hee hee. We all laughed as Tana refused to lose. Once she calmed down, Amara nudged me with her elbow. How are you feeling? Fine. I recovered fully. Good. You pushed yourself a lot. She spoke comfortingly, making me feel a bit warm and fuzzy. Then, Vestmon chimed in with a nod. You're really impressive, John. I fought one of those things today, and while I've killed several before, they don't get any easier. The most I've handled is 4 in a day. I have no idea how you killed a dozen in a single sitting. From the safety of the tower is how. Compared to you guys, I have it a lot easier. You're the impressive ones, going toe to toe with those monsters. I could never. Don't say that. Given the same circumstances, I know you would perform just as well. You've got the determination and the heroic spirit. So don't belittle yourself. What you do is no less impressive than what anyone else does, no matter the position. I went silent for a bit, mulling over those words before nodding and sticking my hand out. Vetsman smiled and took it, the two of us shaking hands. Thank you, Vetsman. It was nothing unobvious. After yesterday, I can confidently say that I would fight fearlessly knowing you're there behind me. I appreciate that. And with you guys there protecting me, I know I have nothing to worry about. I spoke my genuine thoughts. I was vulnerable in battles, so having someone like Vetsman who was trustworthy and reliable gave me great peace of mind. Knowing that he could fight an Authority 5 head-on meant that the two of us could easily secure those kills. I would never have to worry about being overwhelmed. Then, I suddenly looked over at Amara who was smiling while staring down at her plate. With a grin, I put my arm around her shoulder. And let's not forget my favorite support warlock. How were you after an entire day of casting that spell? You don't talk about yourself much, so I forget that you can get tired too. Oh, it wasn't too bad. I was tired, but not as much as you. Still, I couldn't have done it without you. I gave her a hug, patting her head once before letting go. Despite Amara liking to snoop around my private business, she didn't talk much otherwise. She simply stuck to herself and silently worked hard. I had noticed that over time. I made a note to check in on her more instead of just assuming she was doing just fine. Look at these two. I heard Tana snicker, making me shrug. After that, we all finished eating before heading back out. The siege lasted into today as well, but by now it was close to ending. What remained was simply clearing out anything else that walked and taking care of the piling corpses. There were even some teams that came to claim loot. These people would cart out corpses before cutting them open and extracting the black crystals. These black crystals were poisonous to humans. Only after they were purified did they become white crystals, so in this raw form they were worthless. Every scourge beast had them as well, so they quickly piled up. I saw a large wooden crate filled with them. What was curious was how the crate gave off a faint black fog, like it was seeping that poisonous aura into the surroundings. I had never seen anything like that before, so I asked Amara about it. Apparently, with enough crystals or a sufficiently powerful one, the magicka within them will manifest as a fog. A bunch of white crystals in a small space will do the same thing, except the fog would be white. That fog represents an increased density of magicka, and it's actually very beneficial to cultivate in. But doing so is naturally expensive. On the other hand, staying away from a poisonous black fog such as the one around that crate was generally advisable. Just being near it would make you feel sick, but figuring out how to counter that poison is also a form of training. After walking by, we all headed back to the wall. By now, things were calming down, but there was still work to be done. Deciding to help out while I was energetic, I went to head up the wall and pick off some strays. On the way though, I encountered the puppet master, who seemed happy to see me. Nice of you to finally wake up. The puppet master greeted me with a half smile. We shook hands on approach as he looked me up and down. I see you've gotten a bit more powerful. Good. As an elite, you have some catching up to do. So killing an Authority 5 is a prerequisite for becoming one? It is. Just one is enough to get you on the list. You also earn points for each kill. I tallied you at 7 kills, so when we return, the list will update to reflect that. That's it? Tana suddenly spoke up in confusion. I thought he killed 12? He technically did, but not all of them were his sole work. It was difficult to tell and I wasn't watching the entire time, so after some talks with the other instructors, we settled on 7. In fact, they initially only wanted to credit you with 3, but I convinced them otherwise. After all, I know how your summons work the best. Well, the count doesn't matter that much. I'm just glad I'm actually an elite now. Do I get paid? No. Unfortunate. I clicked my tongue in playful disappointment, causing the puppet master to smirk. Then, I nodded to the walls. I was going to pick off some more stragglers. Go ahead. By the way, you elites will be heading out soon. There are already several reconnaissance missions lined up to be completed. This recent siege was by no means natural and we want to know why, so it's a perfect opportunity to put you all to work. Be prepared for that, but at least for the next 3 days, you all will be free to do whatever you want. Understood. We all nodded. After that, I went up the walls while the others went to retire. They had been working all day while I was asleep, so I couldn't expect them to accompany me. Heading up to the central tower, I got a good look at the entire battlefield. The dirt ground for the surrounding half-mile was stained entirely red with blood. So many monsters had died that it had soaked the mud. Not even the walls were spared, as the bottom half was covered in thousands of red streaks. Not only that, but the massive amount of corpses released a deathly rotten fog. The aura was so palpable that I felt suffocated even from the tower. I promptly took out my air mask, sealing it over the bottom half of my face before communing with a rifle and taking aim. Near the walls there were squads of soldiers moving corpses into massive piles and burning them. They surely couldn't just let them rot, and spells made for easy disposal. But beyond I could spot lots of scavengers and lingering beasts. Some were stalking the soldiers while others were feeding on their dead kin. While there were guards making sure the disposal teams weren't attacked, they also weren't proactively attacking themselves. I was perfect for the job, so I didn't hesitate to pull the trigger and get to work. However, this time, I didn't have Amara with me. So when my gun exploded with power, everyone on base heard it. Boom! The shockwave rang the ears of the soldiers in the vicinity and startled everyone else. All attention was promptly turned to the tower. Nobody came to stop me though, so I continued. Like that, shots rang out for the next hour or so. It was only when the sun set that I had to stop since I couldn't see anything. Huh. I took a deep breath after releasing my weapon, sitting up and propping my back against the wall. I sat there for a bit, stewing in my thoughts while taking out a cigar and putting away my mask. Taking a few puffs helped revitalize my body. Staying still for hours on end, especially in the positions that I was in, made my body incredibly sore and stiff. I still felt the remnant aches from the first day of the siege. And then I had slept for an entire day, not making it much better. It was lucky that my mind felt brand new, giving me some relief. All alone in the tower, I was able to get some good alone time. Thinking back, I realized that this was the first time I truly came into contact with the Scourge. I didn't really have the time to worry about first impressions, but perhaps the aftermath of the battle was better for that anyway. Just their mere presence was poisonous. In life, they sought nothing but the deaths of everyone at the base. And in death, they infected the landscape and spread their rotten scent. It would take several days of rotting for a normal animal to leave behind the horrid stench they did. But the Scourge did so in a mere day. Not only that, but I could sense the poisonous aura coming from all of them. Within each of those bodies was toxic magicka stemming from the black crystals, so it was spread in a subtle way that only those attuned to aura could make out. Where an ordinary person would merely want to vomit from the scent, a magus would feel like their soul was sickened from being near the terrible aura. They truly were a scourge. They were good for nothing, their only purpose to corrupt the world. At least animals were an integral part of nature, creating an irreplaceable balance. But this world would be better off without the Scourge. No, it was more accurate to say that the Scourge would need to be eradicated before this world could truly prosper. They were the nemesis of life itself. I now understood that fact, something I hadn't before. And I knew that there was far more to the Scourge than just this. This siege was a mere glimpse of what they were capable of, nothing more than a tasting. The Kingdom of Dragon Tongue, backed by the power of several immense magical organizations and the Church, containing multiple authority 11 magi, had yet to actually defeat the Scourge. This meant that there were beasts and enemies that I couldn't yet fathom. It was likely that the only reason humanity had survived until this point was through their intelligence, something that the vast majority of, if not all, the Scourge beasts lacked. But, did the Scourge also contain intelligent individuals? I thought back to the story about Rayla's late husband, who had been infected and turned into a Scourge entity. Did he have or retain his intelligence? Although twisted, it was possible that he could still think with the capacity of a standard human. In that case, the Scourge no doubt contained intelligent beings at the helm. It was the only way they could wage meaningful war against the humans, the only way to prevent the humans from systematically wiping them out. It went both ways, after all. If humanity could find a way to fight back against the Scourge, then they could find a way to eradicate them. The fact that hadn't happened yet spoke volumes about the depth of the Scourge. In that case, what was the Scourge? Was it a virus, like a zombie virus? Was it a special species? I was more inclined to think that they were like zombies, but it also wasn't that simple. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I knew about the situation. I had learned a good amount about the Scourge, but it was all public knowledge. After all, it was known that the Scourge could infect humans. But there were also no mentions of intelligent Scourge beasts. Maxwell had spoken of royals and unique beasts when discussing crowns. I had no idea what those were. Not even the academy spoke of them. My knowledge was severely limited, which oddly seemed to piss me off. But it became clear from today that the scourge was my existential enemy. For a while now I had been questioning the reason for my appearance in this world. I was brought here with my knowledge and a power that allowed me to summon historical armament from Earth. It seemed perfect for dealing with the scourge. I was beginning to think that they were the reason I was brought here. Perhaps I was some sort of saving grace, but then again, I had a hard time believing that I would be able to become powerful enough to bring about any significant change. How could one man fight against an army? It was simply impossible, made only slightly less impossible through cold steel and explosives. Well, either way, I would do what I could. In this world, fighting in the war meant you were protecting all of humanity from ruin. There was nothing political about it. That made it really easy for me to simply accept what I was doing. I felt no remorse in anything I did here, only fulfillment knowing that I was ending a purely evil enemy. I need to get better. I chuckled a bit, thinking that I needed to focus more on cultivating my power. Everything went back to that. Just then though, I heard the sound of footsteps going up the stone stairs toward the tower I was in. I looked at the doorway while letting out a smoke-filled breath, watching as Amara walked through. We stared at each other for a moment before she spoke softly. "You didn't come down." I was brooding. "What about? Come sit with me and I'll tell you about it." She smiled at my words, walking over before taking a seat at my side. We sat shoulder to shoulder as I briefly explained some of my thoughts. And her response was empathetic. "Yes, the scourge is indeed mysterious. At least for us. Perhaps that's to protect us though. I mean, if everyone knew just how terrible their enemy was, how many people would really volunteer to fight? On the contrary, making them seem like mindless beasts that could be easily defended against would inspire the false bravado of everyone who merely wants the glory of the battle without the sacrifice or horror." That's a good way of putting it. How wise of you. I looked at her, slightly impressed. Coming from the perspective of naivety like myself, she displayed a great understanding of the possible unknown. She smiled a bit. "Those words come from my mother." "Oh. You know her. She's powerful and naturally well aware of the threat the scourge poses. The things she tells me about them usually spare the more intense details. She protects me, even though I don't want that. I'm under the impression that I should be exposed to it now and have time to process it. That way I can stay ahead of the curve. I can see the logic in that." I shrugged in understanding, but then I sighed. Unfortunately, age is also important. That and experience. Experiencing something traumatic before you're fit to cope with it can be permanently debilitating. Your mind may not have the ability to process it yet, whether you like it or not. Basically, if you trust your mother's objective judgment, then don't rush it. I do trust it. That's the only reason I no longer force the issue. But that doesn't mean I like it. But you're mature enough to understand it. I suppose. She sighed with obvious indignation, as if her maturity were a burden. And I understood her plight, even if not from the same perspective. It was amazing how much a person's mentality changed as they got older. Just a single year could flip your worldview. A single event could impart life-changing experience. I understood that from my time on Earth. It was the only reason I had entered college. I trusted the judgment of my parents who had more experience than I, along with the advice of other adults around me, several of which had expressed their regret over their own youthful ignorance. I knew that I was young and didn't know better, so I followed their directions instead of blazing a trail on my own. Well, I was also fearful of what would happen if I was truly cut off from them, who were my lifeline, but I knew I had enough self-awareness to see the truth. Sure enough, a few years later, my mindset had completely changed. I no longer needed their guidance to see that their advice was true. It was amazing to experience my own evolving way of thought, as if I were spectating my own life. It seemed Amara was similar. However, after a few moments of silence between us, I could see her fidget and smile weirdly. She seemed nervous. My heart thrummed a bit harder, as if I could predict what was happening. In fact, I could sense her aura get a bit bolder, like she was about to do something big. She could hide little, my senses reading her like a book, only stopping short of being able to hear her exact thoughts. "So, I was wondering." Well, there really isn't anything to do here, but there is back at the capital. Anyway, I didn't know if you would be open to the thought of, maybe, going to a nice restaurant when we return." I was silent for a few moments while looking over, seeing Amara almost shiver in nervousness. Of course, the fact that I had just been asked out had me a bit fluttery as well, but not nearly as much as her. It was like her life and death hinged on my answer here. Seeing her like this was extraordinary, like seeing an extinct species. I never thought she could get this nervous. All of our interactions prior had been completely cool. She was always rather monotone, almost stoic, except for when she occasionally teased me. Of course, she wasn't robotic. She was just really low-key. Unlike Tana, who wore her heart on her sleeve, she preferred to keep quiet and watch. So this was totally new, getting a glimpse of just how girly she could be. It was unbearably cute. I couldn't even think of anything else as I barely stifled laughter. I felt gleeful. Oh Lord, I've never seen you this nervous. Don't laugh. Please. I'm sorry. I've just never been asked out on a date before. It's kind of magical. I chuckled, thinking that I've always been the one on the other end. Was this how girls felt? Seeing how Amara looked like she was going to explode though, I did my best to control myself and ease her mind. Ahem. I think a date sounds great. Are you sure? Look at you, being all shy. I laughed as she tried to bury her face in her knees. After a moment though, I nudged her with my elbow. But we'll only be back at the capital in 3 weeks. That's too long. What do you mean? I mean that I like you right now and don't want to wait 3 weeks just to go on a date. Granted, being on a military base does indeed make things difficult, but I'm sure we can figure something out. Who said we can't take a date to the recreation room? Oh. She let out a long relieved breath at my words, causing me to laugh again. Just like that, I had started a new relationship. I could see her smile really wide too. She even rocked back and forth like a kid who just got some candy. But then, she rubbed her chin. I'm not sure about a date to the recreation room. We'll figure something out. For now let's go eat. I stood before reaching out and grabbing her hand, pulling her up to her feet and out of the tower. We headed to the mess hall where they were serving dinner. Very few people were there, so we had some alone time while eating. During that time Amara seemed to calm herself down, returning to her usual quiet self. But as I sat across from her, I couldn't stop smiling, constantly thinking back to how she went about asking me out. I even laughed a few times, causing her to cover her face with her hands. Ah, how cute. The day after that exciting night, I met back up with my squad. Of course, seeing Amara again was fun. It was like I was teasing her with every glance I gave her, just the two of us aware of what was different. I had a smile on my face all day while she tried to remain as inconspicuous as possible. Part of me just wanted to go up and give her a kiss on the cheek, just to embarrass her. But I held myself back. Although I hadn't grown up in this world, enough time and interaction had made me understand that social customs weren't the same as America on Earth. Everyone was generally more reserved and modest, more so resembling 20th century America rather than the 21st century. This meant that there wouldn't be any sex after the 3rd date. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if we barely started kissing by that point. I understood that everything would move slower. Not that this changed the way I thought about things. From my experience, I was used to things moving much faster. While I was willing to wait for things like sex, I wasn't sure if I had it in me to do something like wait until marriage, even though according to my own religious belief system, that was the standard. At the very least, I would be pushing our intimacy forward as best I could. That was simply the way I did things. Before all that though, we would need to have our first date. Which, considering the circumstances, wouldn't be easy. There really wasn't much to do on this military base, especially not alone. The recreation room always had people in it and I wasn't interested in having our date in a room full of sweaty nights. There weren't any restaurants, clubs, or any other fun places to go either. In fact, the best candidate for a date given the bare requirements was probably the chapel. So unless we went AWOL, sneaking onto the rail and going back to the city, having a date would be close to impossible. However, after some thinking, I realized that not all hope would be lost. There was still one activity that could give us both alone time and a good location: missions. After the sudden siege, a few days were spent simply recuperating. Shockingly, there were 0 deaths during that time, though there were a few critical injuries like some severed limbs. But it ended very well, all things considered. And afterward, the cleanup was taken care of swiftly. So I spent most of my free time with my squad, all of us just hanging out and having fun. We would also find other squads to play games with, and on the training grounds there was frequent sparring ongoing. I also spent a lot of time studying my formation. That alone took up 3 to 5 hours of my day since I would get so engrossed. But eventually we were put to work. When the 2nd week of our stay started, there was a large list of missions suddenly posted. Like that, all the elite squads were called to report early in the morning. So the night before, we all went to bed eagerly. "You have your armor prepared?" Phaidon asked from across our room. I could see him preparing all his own gear with familiarity. Phaidon wore a full set of armor, but he also had some special items like recovery pills similar to what I used to carry. Since I had very little to prepare, I just nodded. "Yeah, I'm good. Do you even have armor?" "Yeah, it's my coat." "That thing?" He looked at the coat hanging on the corner of my bed with curiosity. It looked like a normal black coat unless you inspected it closely and found the purple lines. So to most people, I just really liked the coat and wore it all the time. Not that it was a false assumption, but the main reason I wore it was for its protection. But I didn't need people knowing how amazing it was. Even I didn't completely understand how high quality it was. So I gave him a succinct answer. "I can't wear heavy armor like you guys, so that coat acts as light armor." "I see. What about your feet and head?" "I have boots. As for my head, I can't say I really have anything for it. Plus, I need my eyes for my weapons, so no helmets." "Makes sense." Phaidon nodded. He had seen my weapons, so he generally knew that my sight was important when working with them. After that, Phaidon went back to preparing his gear. I, on the other hand, started messing with my aerial. Before leaving, San had given me some special instructions. First, I needed to access the web. And second, I needed to test out the local communication functions. The second part was easy. With a press of the button I could turn my aerial into a local node and allow anybody nearby to share communications with each other. Under normal circumstances you had to be connected to a city's node in order to send messages, but since my aerial became that, I could act as the server for everyone in my group. It would be great for our mission. Not only that, but I could contact someone back at base if we were ever in trouble since my aerial had a much longer range than normal one. It was the first part, accessing the web, that proved to be more difficult. Simply getting there was easy. There was the equivalent of an app on the aerial that brought me to a rudimentary browser. I could search for and access nodes from there. The issue was actually finding a node to connect to. There wasn't much of a search engine yet, so sifting through nodes was like looking through a phone book. I had actually started going through them during my free time. While doing so I saw many interesting nodes. Most of them required some kind of authorization to access. But shockingly, this didn't prevent me from accessing them. I could only assume that my aerial had some advanced permissions because I directly bypassed the authorization process every time. Because of that, I actually managed to view the Magisterium's node that held hundreds of research documents and information. I didn't go through it all but did indeed stash the name of the node for later. There were many others just like it, including some shady private nodes that I didn't care to stick around in. But above all these, I kept an eye out for my main target. And while Phaidon went to bed, I actually found it. Black Spider Repository. I mumbled while clicking to access the node, and without delay, I was allowed access. A website appeared in front of my eyes, one with several different pages that ranged from forums to the big list of bounties. I went straight to look at the bounties, and sure enough, I found myself on there. Below my portrait was the 40,000 coin bounty as well as my personal details. But below that was a page dedicated to information on my whereabouts. There wasn't much on that page other than the fact that I had left the Magisterium for a trip. Beyond that, it was blank. It felt weird looking at a bounty for myself. Part of me was fearful, remembering just how dangerous my time in the city would be. I really couldn't let my guard down, but I wasn't sure how I was supposed to be eternally vigilant. Thankfully there wouldn't be much attention on me when I went back since I would have been gone for so long. I couldn't imagine that someone would risk their life to kill a supposed authority 5 for a mere 40 gold bullion. With a sigh, I scrolled past my portrait. There was no use worrying about that stuff now. I looked at the others, primarily the bounties with the highest payouts listed at the top. And I saw some interesting names. Anderson, an authority 11 paladin of the church. Luna, the head of the Polaris family, authority 10+. Gunson, headmaster of the Clockwork Association, authority 9+. Patriarch Tavera 2. Seems everyone famous has a bounty. I chuckled as I saw a name I knew. The topmost bounties had rewards of billions of coin. It was enough to live the rest of your life lavishly, but it was arguable that there was no amount of money in this world that could buy the death of some of these people. How many people could kill an authority 11? There were probably a handful of people within the kingdom, and even less who would be willing. So basically, these rewards were just trophies that those people could flaunt, like an ego boost. People like myself would be in far more danger since we could actually be killed. After scrolling for a while, I no longer saw any names that I recognized. While I got a good read on some faces, some of which were very pretty women, I mainly just snooped around for the hell of it. However, when going through some of the other pages, I saw another interesting list. It was a bounty list, but instead of for humans, it was for scourge beasts. I looked at the link to the page for a bit before clicking it. I was morbidly curious, so I didn't hesitate to find the top of the list. And the number 1 spot made me confused. The 4 kings. I was a single bounty for 4 individuals. I scrolled through the details and saw their names. King of Anarchy, King of Despair, King of the Brood, King of Unholy Light. These were the titles of the 4 strongest beings of the Scourge. Each of them stood at the pinnacle of power, authority 12, and had lived for hundreds of years. They were each terrifying existences. There were no pictures of them, and there wasn't even a bounty posted. But there were some details about their power, or at least the consequences of their presence. The most eye-catching was the King of Unholy Light. It was said that all who stood within the light emitted by this king would be melted where they stood and turn into an unrecognizable monster known as a flesh bug. These flesh bugs would then seek out the nearest human, and upon contact would melt the victim and turn it into an identical flesh bug. The most horrifying part about this wasn't the transformation though. It was the fact that, when a flesh bug would seek out a human target, it would mysteriously acquire the memories of that human and begin speaking with the voices of those its target knew and loved. It would come to you with the voice of your lover, child, or best friend. And with your memories it would try and tempt you toward it while hunting you from the dark. Because of this, there were accounts of soldiers going insane from the horror and trauma of encountering these flesh bugs. And it was said that a siege of these monsters would hail an unholy symphony of screams that drowned out entire valleys. Simply reading about this beast made me shiver, and I quickly remembered that this was just one of the 4 kings. I didn't end up reading any information about the other 3, forcing myself to scroll past the bounty before staring up at the ceiling with my eyes wide open. To say that I wasn't scared was a lie. But I found comfort in the fact that the kingdom of Dragon Tongue was able to hold its ground against these horrifying creatures and survive till this day. There were people out there so powerful that they could fight on the same level as those kings. They were keeping us safe. This was all I could tell myself to try and drown out the horror from those stories. Because I knew that, if anything, those stories were watered down from reality. After several minutes, I finally regained myself. But I found that I wasn't able to close my eyes, so I pulled back up the site and started scrolling further down the list. The beasts lower down weren't nearly as terrifying. They had pictures and there was much more detailed information. I read intently, compiling information on dozens of different beasts of different types and levels before coming to a conclusion. There were in fact intelligent beasts among the Scourge, and those beasts didn't come from infecting humans. There were bloodlines within the Scourge, and there were different levels for these bloodlines. The ones most prevalent were the royal bloodlines. There were 4 of them, and each descended from the 4 kings. In fact, those with these bloodlines weren't really beasts. They were humanoid creatures with intelligence and special powers. They could cultivate power just like humans, but in general were more powerful at the same authority. An authority 6 royal wouldn't lose to an authority 6 human, regardless of type. It took very talented humans to fight on par with royals, and the only saving grace was that there weren't many royals. At least, there weren't many worth concerning over. The limits of a royal was purely dictated by their bloodline density, which fell off with each generation. This meant there was a strict hierarchy that frequently cycled itself at the lower levels and almost never changed at the higher levels. Other than that, there were unique beasts. These were creatures without a royal bloodline that ascended beyond standard limits to attain both intelligence and strong powers. Some of them even birthed their own families and bloodlines. I saw many of both types of these creatures on the bounty list. Because of that, I now knew the identifying features of a royal and what to look out for with a unique beast. At some point, I logged out of the node and shut down my aerial. In the darkness I stewed in my own thoughts, thinking about what I learned. It was a shock to know that there were obscenely powerful beasts out there, ones that could annihilate entire cities simply by being there. And then there were the royals and unique beasts, enemies that I would probably end up facing sometime in the future. Looking at them and hearing about their powers had me fearful. It was difficult to believe that I could actually rise to their level, let alone kill them. But my own powers gave me confidence. And when I thought about the threat they posed and the devastation they've caused, I became more angry than cowardly. They needed to be eradicated. Every last one of them were monsters undeserving of their life on this world. I was already sure before, but it seemed that with everything I learned, I was only becoming more certain of my conviction to fight these monsters. So for a while I laid on my bed, smoldering in hate that drowned out any fear I had for the scourge. And it was only late in the night when I finally managed to fall asleep. Asterisk. Huh? A confused sound escaped my lips as I heard the echoing calls of a bird. The lush greenery around me didn't seem out of place even though it wasn't there when I fell asleep. Or, I thought it was greenery at first, but when I stepped forward to walk around a tree, I took a glimpse at the blue bark of the tree trunk and the purple grasses that rose up to my knees. I stared at it for a moment before drifting through the forest around me, making my way forward as if I knew where I was going and wasn't in a completely unfamiliar place. Or perhaps someone was guiding me. It felt like my steps weren't intentional, like a boat without sails being led by the currents underneath it. I was led out of the forest, the trees and brush coming to a halt all at once as I reached the end. The knee-high grass drew a perfect line across the landscape I gazed upon, going from tall to dirt. The mud I stepped in did nothing to dirty my shoes, but when I looked at it, I saw that it wasn't brown, but red. And it wasn't mud. My vision focused, seeing a few brown patches where the blood had yet to coat. The scent of iron suddenly filled my nose, making me so nauseous that I fell to my knees and vomited. Cough. What I vomited, I didn't know. All I knew was that I fell to the floor with a miserable feeling in my stomach. However, I could only remain there for a few seconds before everything suddenly changed again. The blood-soaked mud disappeared. What replaced it was a deep black filament, like the ground was made of metal shavings and gunpowder. My fingers could slip into it, but it also fell apart easily, coating my hands in ashy dust that couldn't be removed. For some reason, I wiped my face right after, smearing it all over my forehead, cheeks, and eyes. Some got in my nose as well, but I didn't feel like sneezing. Then, I lifted my head. I saw nothing. No land formations like hills or plains, and no blue sky. It was night, but with no stars. The landscape I stood upon was a perfectly flat plain made of black filament. There wasn't even any wind, no humidity either. After only a few seconds, my mouth became dry. Then, as I stood there with no direction, I felt a small vibration in the ground. It traveled up the soles of my feet and shook my legs. At first I thought it was similar to the purrs of a cat, a gentle and low vibration. But it didn't stop, and over time, it jumped in intensity. It soon sounded like the growls of a tiger or lion. Then it got loud, sounding like a jackhammer that caused earthquakes. After that, all I could hear was screaming that shook the skies and ground, threatening to throw me off my feet. My heart rate skyrocketed. It felt like I was fighting for my life even though I couldn't see the enemy. It felt like something was coming, yet just its mere presence in the area was sowing havoc and chaos. I got angry, irrationally so. It felt like I needed someone, something, to appear in front of me so I could kill it. And then, I felt something behind me. So I turned around with a twisted face, a low battle cry escaping my lips as I prepared myself for battle. But what I saw instantly washed away all feelings of wrath or battle. It was an ugly being. Its amalgamated torso carried 6 arms with no symmetry, as if they were sewn randomly across its body. It also had 4 legs, one of a lion, one of a lizard, and 2 hind legs with talons. And it had 2 heads, one of a human, and one of what I could only describe as a pile of flesh. The human head had no eyes and a mouth sewn shut. It only had 2 slits for a nose and many more scars that twisted its visage. And the mound of flesh had 6 eyes and 3 mouths, each mouth having 2 tongues. It was a horrible sight, and just gazing upon it induced catastrophic fear that made my eyes bleed and legs shake in weakness. But I didn't buckle. That was because, just when I felt so weak that I couldn't so much as stand, a pair of arms reached out from behind. They hugged my chest, helping me stay on my feet and wash away the fear inside me. It felt so comforting, like the embrace of a mother. My mind turned clear with its power, and yet when I continued to stare at that abomination in front of me, I still felt deep fear. I knew that I couldn't kill it. Despite the courage that I mustered to so much as face it, I knew that it was impossible to harm it. So I spoke to the being behind me. My guardian angel. I need strength, I said, yet I knew I asked. And perhaps I wasn't surprised by its response. You need fortitude, she told me in a sweet, unwavering, kind voice, and yet I laughed. I chuckled even while gazing at that abomination. But within me, I could already feel sorrow for something that hadn't happened. And then, my eyes opened. John? I looked up, seeing the ceiling as well as Fiden's concerned face to the side. He turned away when he noticed me looking over. Then, I felt a bit of moisture, lifting my fingers to my eyes to find tears. Part of me wanted to act confused, but I knew what I had just seen and felt. I couldn't deny it, even if it was a dream. So I just sat up, the room filled with an awkward silence I didn't care to acknowledge. I sat there for several minutes as Fiden dressed himself in his armor. I didn't move to do anything, simply thinking. That was, until Fiden finished and spoke. Our briefing is in an hour. Are you coming to eat? Yeah. I'll be right out. All right. Take your time. I could hear the attempted comfort in his words as he left. Soon enough, I was all alone. After another several minutes, I suddenly took out a parchment, looking at all the complicated lines written on it. I had already comprehended a quarter of it. And now that I looked back, I hadn't even used the white crystal to power that advancement. It simply happened, but then again, what changed wasn't technically my overall power level, but how the power was constructed and utilized. Along with the parchment, I retrieved the white crystal Maxwell had given me. Then, I began circulating it. Closing my eyes and becoming aware of my aura, I cast Psyche into it and empowered it. Then, blue lines started appearing in the air. They sparked, shooting across space and copying the formation in my hands. At first they drew short lines, but after only 3 tries, I managed to draw the entire first quarter of the formation in midair. I opened my eyes, seeing the partial formation, before expanding it. The empty circle that was my unfinished formation began to fill up just a little bit more. And the spark within my mind grew that much more. The spark was entirely focused on building more of the formation, and with each second that the formation grew, the spark received more power to use for its focus, creating a positive feedback loop. I rode that wave, pushing it further and further, even treading into territory I hadn't yet gotten to, comprehending it on the fly. But then, I suddenly stopped. Taking a long breath, I looked at the formation that was now 40% complete. In fact, I had stopped on purpose when I actually had more in me. I simply felt like I should. I felt like pushing these moments of inspiration too far would burn me out. Not only that, but it would tire me before the mission. It was great progress and almost effortless. With a small smile, I took my gains and went. Stashing the parchment and crystal, I stood from my bed and wiped what remained of the dried-up tears on my face. After that, I cleaned myself up and dressed before heading out. John. After entering the mess hall, I heard Tana call me. She was sitting with the rest of my squad, so after going to grab food, I went over and sat with them. Umara was sitting on one end, so there was an open spot next to her which I cleanly took. I had a feeling she did it on purpose. I tapped her with my elbow as I sat and glanced at Fiden. He smiled at me, which I returned before focusing on eating. We were all silent for a while. After all, we didn't have much time. Time to go. After several minutes, Vetsman suddenly spoke and stood with an empty tray. I followed, stuffing the last of my food in my mouth. The others came behind us, and before long, we all headed toward the briefing room. At the entrance, the puppet master was waiting. I greeted him as we went through the door. Good morning, Mr. Puppet. John. I hope you're rested. We shook hands before I grabbed a seat at the table in the room. As soon as everyone had greeted each other, we all settled in. Along with the puppet master, there was also our commander along with one other officer. All right, listen up. The commander spoke as the room went dark. Then, the wall in front of us flashed before displaying a magical projection of a map. It was of the surroundings beyond the base. There were some markers as well as indicators for geological features. You are the first team we're sending out on a mission. This man here is Lieutenant Captain Hammett, an Authority 6 warlock. He'll be following you all and overseeing the mission. I'll allow him to explain the details. Good day, you all. You can just address me as Sir Hammett. The officer waved to us. He was an average-height man with a slim build dressed in some light armor. He seemed friendly enough with his combed-back hair, so we all nodded back to him. Then, he pointed to the map behind him. Our mission today is to do some reconnaissance. These scourge tides are by no means random. There is usually an entity guiding them, usually using the tide in order to test whatever base they siege. Our goal is to find that entity, or at least its traces. If we can't find it or at least confirm its departure, then there may be a risk of another tide. Sir Hammett has come from the nearby frontier bastion Gavalda. Turns out, they've also experienced a scourge tide, and not one on a level ours could compare to. It seems we caught its remnants, but that also means the leading entity could be around here, so he will be your guide and you will support him. Commander Bosnan chimed in after, giving us a little more context. News that we weren't the only ones to get sieged surprised me, primarily because I felt that we should have been warned. I figured it was safe practice to warn any bases in the vicinity of a scourge tide, just in case. While the alarm did in fact go off sometime before the tide arrived, it definitely took longer than that for the tide to travel. Then again, perhaps I was thinking too much. It wasn't like a base that was getting besieged could keep track of every enemy, especially when the forces they faced were apparently so much greater than what appeared on our own doorstep. I guess we should just be thankful that we had any advance notice at all. Sir Hemet spoke. We will take a crawler out to the entity's most likely location, which is this hillside right here. There are a few other places around there to check out if that doesn't give us anything, including a forest nearby. This operation will take an entire day. We won't be getting back until late at night, and depending on our results, we will continue tomorrow. Also, be prepared to fight. There may be small groups of beasts that continue to lurk, so this won't just be a sightseeing trip. Any questions? What supplies should we grab? I raised my hand and asked. If we would be outside the wire all day, then we would at least need food. He nodded at my question. I suggest grabbing some rations, enough for 2 days. Since we'll be in a crawler, there will be some cargo space to store packs. Otherwise, just bring anything you'll need to take care of basic necessities. There are no special requirements for this mission, and I will be bringing medical supplies just in case. Understood. Then go ahead and pack. We leave in 15 by the gate. Dismissed. With his word, we all stood to leave. All the rations were stored by the mess hall, so we stopped by there to grab supplies. I also grabbed a pack to store those items. I had never received one, so I simply requisitioned one from the armory. As for anything else I thought I needed, they were all stashed away in the spatial sack on my arm. With that, we all met up by the gates. In front of it was the crawler Sir Hemet spoke of. It was a vehicle that looked like an armored truck. Inside it had 2 rows of seats along with a magic turret on top. And in the back it had an enclosed cargo trunk. We all threw our bags in the trunk before boarding. I couldn't help but smile as I felt the cold hard metal of its construction. This thing was an inch of armor away from being an APC. The space given to us was nice too. Since people in this world tended to be taller, vehicles were accommodating for that. We wouldn't be cramped in a metal box. Sir Hemet was driving, and after we had all boarded, the truck rolled out of the base. The location for our recon was about 15 miles away. With this truck, it would take around an hour to get there when factoring in all the terrain. So I settled in, next to Amara of course. She hadn't spoken at all this morning, but we had made eye contact several times, which was more than enough to make both of us smile. But I was also sitting next to Vetsman, who was enjoyable to talk to. Right now, he was geared up in plate armored pants. His chest plate was sitting underneath his seat, and his weapon was undoubtedly stashed in a spatial sack. His torso was covered in a fitted cloth shirt meant for wearing underneath armor, but because it was fitted, it made his muscles bulge. I had a good physique, but this man was simply built larger. A brick shithouse, if you will. He was a wall and definitely knew how to use that to his advantage. I nudged him. Hey, what did you do to get that huge? Do you eat entire cows for dinner? Haha, I'm fortunate enough to have a large diet, yes. I've also trained since I was of age. Most of that training wasn't for the spear or sword, but simple physical training. My family believes that endurance is even more important than weapon skill. Your family? Are you from some kind of knight family? I asked, curious more about the structure of his background rather than his personal origins. I had heard about families in several industries, and they seemed to be similar to entire organizations. Vetsman nodded. It's something like that. My family is a paladin peerage of the church. We have a few branches, but I come from the main branch, surnamed Verga. Oh, a paladin peerage. I nodded, impressed. I had only ever heard of paladins in fantasy, but it seemed they were a real thing here. But I was still curious, so I inquired. What does it mean to be a paladin? Or a paladin peerage? A paladin peerage is simply a noble family within the church that is headed by a paladin. And what is a paladin? All those who are authority 12 under the church become a paladin. Oh, so they're the strongest. I was enlightened and asked another question. So your father is a paladin? Haha, no. My great-grandfather was, but he died in the last major war. But he was not the first paladin of our line, and thus we have retained our status as a paladin peerage, hoping to produce another one. I see. Are you going to be the next? If the Lord wills it. Otherwise, I will simply do as I can. Paladins aren't the only people who can influence a war. Every soldier matters, so as long as I bring value to the church, I will continue down my path. Ah, how noble of you. I nodded before suddenly smiling at him. Now tell me how you really feel. Hey now, why would I expose myself? He responded cheekily, causing us to laugh. After that we continued talking to pass the time. Tana and the others chimed in at some point too, spilling details about their families and origins. And soon enough, we started to approach our target area. At some point the crawler rolled off-road. We tread through some plains before heading up a large hill and finally coming to a stop. Everyone disembarked and scanned the surroundings. There was no immediate threat, but we still had to be wary. The entity we were hunting wouldn't be alone, that much we knew. However, we also didn't know how powerful it was. Since we weren't going in with much intelligence, an extra layer of caution was warranted. But after several minutes of looking around, nothing was found. So we all settled while gathering around Sir Hemet. Alright, here's what we'll do. He took out his aerial, tapping a few times before bringing up a map. From here we need to move down the hill in that direction. While we don't see anything out of the ordinary now, this thing could be hiding in plain sight, so we still need to search some key landmarks. But since we don't have communications all the way out here, we'll all need to go together. I have a suggestion. I suddenly raised my hand, prompting Hemet to turn and stare at me. I spoke. I'm good with long-distance attacks and observation, and this hilltop is perfect for someone like me. I was wondering if it would be better for me to stay here and provide some overwatch for the group. You're the summoner? Yes, sir. I nodded, to which he went silent for a few moments. Very well. You will stay with the crawler and watch us from afar. Understood. I will also need Amara to stay with me for support. The warlock? That doesn't seem optimal. If you get attacked you will need close-range support, so. Sir Hemet looked around, finding and pointing at Tana. She will stay back with you. Are you sure, sir? Amara is already my designated support, and she's not a knight, so she may hold you back while traveling. I spoke back up. While staying back with Amara was partially driven out of my desire to have some alone time, it was also practical. Her auxiliary support was rather critical to ensuring I didn't attract every living thing within a 5-mile radius, including potential enemies. We complemented each other well, even if there was truth to Hemet's statement. But his only response came with a frown. Please don't question my decision. I'm not a knight either and I'll be walking just as much. Leaving you here is already enough of a risk. She will stay with you here and neither of you will leave this position until we have returned. Am I clear? Yes. I responded dully, my mood having been quickly ruined. I get it. He was military, I was just a school kid, and I was talking back. He didn't even need to explain himself, but he was being lenient and exercising some patience, even if it was thin. He sure wasn't like that in the briefing room. It amazed me how different he had become in just an hour. Perhaps he was just locked in for the mission, but it still pissed me off. I was glad I was taller, since I was able to look down on him as he tried to seem intimidating while exercising his authority. Eventually he turned away. Gear up. We're heading out as soon as possible. With those words, everyone else went to go and make final preparations. As they did so though, I went up to them. It was time to test out my aerial's main function, the mobile node. With the built-in program, I was able to create a node on the fly and allow others to connect to it. This wasn't simply something like a website that gave information, but a transceiver that could send and receive data. The transmission range of this aerial was far higher than the standard ones, meaning I could connect to everyone even when they were miles away. And with myself as the medium, they could all maintain contact with each other. So I went over to everyone and helped them connect to my node. It took a few minutes, but before long, everyone was connected and could send messages to each other. I could even create a large group chat, which I did, allowing us to pool our messages. Of course, Hemet wasn't invited. My current mood could basically be summed up with the phrase, "Fuck that guy." Amara also came up to me one last time before leaving, giving me a wry smile. You didn't have to talk back for me. It wasn't for you, but for everyone. I work best with you. But since that's not happening, we better hope I don't need to step in. Otherwise, any nearby enemies will come flocking. Keep that in mind. Right. I will. She nodded seriously. Such a thing was a very real possibility and could end badly if not handled properly. With that, the group separated. Vetsmon, Fiden, and Amara left with Hemet while Tana and I stayed behind. We watched as they descended the hill. Their first landmark to investigate was actually the side of the hill itself. It was completely covered in scattered rock formations including massive boulders and deep crevices. The entity could be hiding anywhere inside, and they would need to check. Of course, they wouldn't be searching blindly. That's why Hemet was here. Using detection spells, they could scan an area with pulses of mana, greatly accelerating their search speed. They wouldn't be going that far from us at the top. At the least, they would always be within my range. Before finding a rock to perch myself on though, I went around the crawler, taking a peek at the driver's seat. And its layout surprised me. It looked similar to cars on Earth. There was a steering wheel, a key to start it, and pedals on the floor for acceleration and braking. Of course, Hemet didn't leave the key behind, so I unfortunately couldn't play around. Still, it was good to know that vehicles were similar to what I knew. Then again, the design was rather intuitive anyway. Not surprising that it was universal. It was only then that I found a rock, brought out a seat for myself, and got comfortable. Taking out my rifle, I could see the group gradually making their way down the hill through my scope. While doing that, I lifted my aerial and started speaking. "Come in, squad. Comms check. Can you hear me?" "I can hear you." "Me too. Same here." "Hey, what's that?" I smiled as I heard Hemet's voice through someone else's aerial, speaking again. "Just another form of communication, sir. I'll inform you all if I spot anything out of the ordinary. For now, you're clear. Let me know if you need anything else." "Will do. Good to know my back is being watched." Vetsmon smiled while looking back up the hill, waving once toward us before continuing down. And I could see Hemet's weird face as he wasn't sure what to say. "Yeah, that's right, asshole. You didn't get invited to the party." I smiled in petty victory. After that though, we all settled in for the long haul. For me, I just had to hurry up and wait. And since I was watching, Tana decided to kick back and relax. My, how I wished Amara was here. We could be talking and keeping each other company, but our asshole superior decided to get in the way. Well, I wouldn't neglect my job, but I still wasn't happy. And since they were all busy hiking, I couldn't really text her either. How depressing. For about 2 hours I watched them hike down. That was when they reached the bottom of the hill and spread out a bit more. Vetsmon stayed with Amara, going one way while Hemet and Fiden went another. They searched all the dozens of crevices and hidden areas, but after an hour, nothing came up. At some point, noon started to come around and the sun started beating down. Thankfully summer had already passed and it was getting cooler, so it was actually a really nice day weather-wise. It was sunny, making everything clear. From my vantage point, I could make out any and all abnormalities. As I looked between the two groups, Tana spoke from beside me. "You know, the missions on these trips seem cool for a bit, but then you're forced to sit around for hours and suddenly you wish you had just stayed back at the school. At least with the puppet master we had constant battles." I think real danger tends to make things more exciting, even if most of the time you're just plain bored." I commented back while adjusting my seating position. I had learned over time that staring through an optic could fatigue your eye. So since I first sat down, I had been using my left eye to observe, saving my right eye for when I needed it. I also got nice and stiff when sitting in one position for so long, so I shifted between several different positions on top of my chosen rock. I also stacked my bag full of rations and supplies underneath me, providing some extra cushion. Doing that, Tana and I talked back and forth for a while. We laughed occasionally and simply passed the time. But then, the first interesting thing happened. It wasn't much. Nothing more than a random rock suddenly shifting and falling down the side of the hill. But it immediately caught my attention. My sharp eye, having been trained by video games from Earth to pick out the tiniest and fleeting details in fast-paced shooters, spotted a momentary distortion heading down the hill. It was the slightest warp in light, but it was enough to make my heart thrum with adrenaline. Sure enough, only another second or so of observation and I was able to see the distortion again as it headed toward my squad. I suddenly yelled into the open comms. "Enemy contact. Heading towards Vetsmon, your right side." In my scope, I watched as Vetsmon and Amara instantly turned with my directions. But I wasn't going to trust that they would spot the enemy and risk them getting hurt, so after taking a few seconds to aim, I pulled the trigger with an empowered shot. Boom! Screech! Everyone heard a scream as my bullet tore into the entity. Blood splattered across some rocks as the distorted light flickered even more, outright revealing the enemy. It was a gray beast that looked like a spiked wolf. It had sharp spines along its back and a sleek, thin body. Its abnormally long claws made it look even more vicious as it left streaks across the rocks it jumped along. My bullet had torn accurately through its torso, but it wasn't enough to severely injure it. Plus, after revealing itself, it went berserk. It started running and streaking across the hillside, heading down toward its prey. I couldn't land another shot. But now that they could see it, I had no qualms. Sure enough, Vetsmon stepped forward with his tower shield and spear, meeting the beast head-on. They clashed before long, Amara supporting with some debuffing spells from behind that would provide him an advantage. And as that happened, I pulled away from my scope for a moment and looked around. At several other positions along the hillside, I could see some more distortions. More of those beasts came charging, but the more they moved, the easier they were to spot. I spoke into my aerial. Phaidon, 3 more enemies coming in behind you. Amara, 1 more to your left. I'm taking my shot. Roger. I heard her voice come back over. At the same time, I took aim at the moving distortion. It was moving slower, perhaps trying to sneak up while its kin was acting as bait. At that moment though, I saw Tana step up. Should I go help? No. Boom. I took my shot, hitting the beast and taking it out of stealth. I then looked at Tana. Stay here and check the surroundings over there for me. Tell me if there are any enemies coming. This noise might attract attention. Got it. She didn't hesitate to follow my orders, running off and scanning the landscape around us. While she did that, I continued to watch my squad. Despite having 3 enemies, Phaidon was fine since Hemet was right there. He cast large area spells to find the enemies, lock them down, and then kill them before Phaidon could even step in. And since I had shot both of the beasts going toward Vetsmon and Amara, they were able to easily handle those fights and finish them off. But even that was less of a pressing concern. After all, they weren't the controlling entities. The boss was still out there, and it was definitely in control of those wolf beasts. Otherwise, they would have appeared sooner. Then, all of a sudden, I felt a chill go down my neck. I instantly responded as the powers of my coat actuated with a purple flash, spinning around while communing with a peacekeeper. Sure enough, I saw a beast running right toward me in slow motion, about to lunge forward. Its distortion faded as it jumped, its maws aimed right for my throat. But my pistol came up in time, my barrel only a few feet away from its vicious snout and blood-red eyes when I pulled the trigger. Bang! Ack! The body went limp as my empowered bullet tore straight through its skull, but the body continued straight toward me, falling on top of me. I felt its claws and spines stab me in a few places not covered by my coat. I immediately threw it off, but blood came out as I did so, staining my clothes. Shit. These are nice too. John. Are you okay? Tana came running over, sliding to my side with worry all over her face as if I was going to die. I waved her away. I'm fine. Keep watching out for enemies. Are you sure? Let me get the med kit. No, I got it. How could I not have my own medical supplies on me? I had been injured too many times to count in the trenches, so I had gotten pretty good at packing wounds. Taking out some gauze and wrap, I felt around and stuffed the wounds based on how much it bled. Anything that wasn't pouring was left alone. And after taking care of that, I went right back to work. Sending Tana off, I looked back down, seeing the finished battles. However, even though the wolves were dead, Hemet was still moving. I found the entity. It's running, so I'll chase. You all stay. Just like that, Hemet used magic to give chase. Right after that, I saw a figure running toward a hill opposite to us. I took aim at it, but it was too far to hit. It may only have been 400 or 500 meters away, but that was beyond the effective range of this weapon. This rifle was pre-World War, after all. It wasn't a modern sniper. Besides, Hemet could take care of it. And since he was gone, I took command. Everyone, head back up here and regroup. John. Right as I spoke, Tana suddenly shouted. I had a bad feeling. I see enemies coming toward us. There's a lot. Fantastic. I scowled. You see, Hemet? This is why you listen to me. You think you know how I operate better than I do? You think my judgment was just shit out of my ass? And now there's a horde coming. How wonderful. Everyone, double time. Put that training to work. I shouted while changing positions, setting my sights on the small horde of stray beasts heading toward us from the bottom of the hill. And I opened fire, cursing our stupid commanding officer. Phaidon and Vetsmon were quick to ascend the hill. Knights had it easy like that with their ridiculous strength. And Vetsmon carried Amara so she didn't get left behind. so before long, we had all regrouped and prepared. Boom! The explosions coming from my guns echoed across the landscape. I was shooting as fast as I could, but although most of the beasts were weak, there were plenty of them. And after my squad assembled around me, I paused and took out a cigar, speaking while lighting it. Vetsmon, Fiden. You two will take point in front of us. Fiden, support Vetsmon. Tana, you're going to support them both. Take care of anything they can't. Understood. They all nodded and moved forward. There was a good amount of space on top of this hill, so they wouldn't have to fight on slope terrain. But all that space left room for beasts to fill. If we weren't careful, we would get surrounded. Well, not like we hadn't faced these scenarios before with the Puppet Master. There were very few times that any of the teams I worked with ever failed, no matter the situation. More often than not, I took command. As the observation specialist, I tended to have a better grasp on the overall situation. Of course, finding people who would trust me in the first place was more of a concern. Thankfully, Vetsmon and Fiden took to my orders easily despite this being the first real time we had ever worked together. Or perhaps it was just how irritated I sounded. Right now, I wasn't in the position where I would take no for an answer. After the knights moved up, I looked toward my trusty warlock. Umara, you're responsible for crowd control. Don't let our vanguard get surrounded. Roger. She nodded and moved up, beginning to cast spells. As for myself, well, my job didn't need to be stated. Climbing on top of the crawler, I got a nice view of everyone's backs as well as the slope down the hill. A rough estimation yielded 100 or 2 beasts. And they weren't all coming in one large group. They were scattered and had no sense of unity, attacking in small waves. By the time I was ready, Vetsmon had already made first contact. He greeted the first beast with the tip of his spear, outright skewering it and throwing it away, almost slicing it in half from that action alone. And Fiden followed up by simply slashing a beast across the face when it lunged at him, killing it instantly. That's when I suddenly remembered. Vetsmon and Fiden were Authority 5. Only 6 people in the elites were Authority 5, and they were 2 of them. The rest were Authority 4, with myself occupying the bottommost rung. So those 2 had no issue dealing with beasts under their level. They could even fight Authority 5s head-on, those behemoths I had seen during the siege being some of them. So while an entire army of beasts could overwhelm a single person, that didn't mean the person would fall. It simply meant they would take a bit more time to clear them out. I understood quickly that Vetsmon and Fiden didn't need much help. Plus, they had the support of Tana and Umara who would only make it easier for them to kill faster. And that wasn't to mention me, their Overwatch who would pick off a few to keep their backs safe. The only issue was, beasts only continued to come. In the distance, I could see faint dots heading toward us. They were still scattered, but there were a lot of them. At least another few hundred by my count. I felt a headache come on even as my cigar worked to alleviate my wounds. If that asshole had only listened. Now I was stuck cleaning up the mess. Taking aim, I decided I could work on my marksmanship here, picking off distant targets. My bullets sailed over the heads of my squad, some bullets missing, others finding their mark. Over time, as I communed with more weapons, I received the experiences of more people. Sometimes during my training, I would take a dive into the dimensions of my authorities and sift around for more weapons to benefit from. Of course, cursory communions didn't garner that much. I found that the more I used a weapon, the more I would deepen the connection and the more experience I would receive. And so far, I had used this Remington Lee-scoped rifle quite a bit. My connection with it was deeper than any other gun I had and the experiences I received from it were invaluable. I wasn't a marksman before coming to this world. Sure, I had some experience shooting guns, but nothing that would make me extraordinary. My aim was decent. That was all I knew. But the experiences from this rifle made me into a proper marksman, someone who could utilize his weapon with adept familiarity. That made this weapon's effective range of 300 meters truly effective in my hands. There was little I would miss unless the target was moving sporadically or was smaller than normal. But I still had much to learn. I wasn't an expert yet, and since guns were my thing, I needed to get very good at them. That included these older variants, even though they may not be as precise or easy to use as the modern ones. And thankfully, I improved as I continued to practice, especially since my mind was improving as my spark grew more powerful. With a sharper mind, I indirectly strengthened my senses and dexterity. Being able to think faster was especially helpful, my reaction time shortening considerably and my ability to make judgments jumping a magnitude. This was all to say that, even right now with only decent marksmanship, I was a damn good shot. Boom. Another bullet sailed beside Vetsman's body, instantly killing an incoming beast about 120 meters away. About 2 hours had passed, and right now, I was wholly concentrated. Those 2 hours passed relatively easily. The beasts were constant, but they were never overwhelming. Our group worked well, supporting each other and efficiently killing monsters because of it. I was able to thin out some groups before they even stepped foot onto the hill, so by the time they arrived, they had no choice but to get caught in some of Amara's traps and finished off by Vetsman, Phaidon, and Tana one by one. Phaidon killed the most by far, while Vetsman was a close second. And Tana, although she didn't kill a lot, did her job very well. She was responsible for watching the surroundings of her allies, not simply finding as many enemies to kill as she could. Her job, like Vetsman's, was protection. She made sure that Phaidon could properly support Vetsman, who was acting as the tank and prevented any beasts from pressuring Amara. So she was constantly moving, providing her extra power where needed to keep the battle favorable. I was beginning to see why she was in the middle ranks. She was fast, meaning she was a great scout. So she didn't kill a lot, but she was still vitally important to make sure things didn't go wrong. After all, if Amara was suddenly pressured, and her auxiliary support for Vetsman disappeared, then he would get overwhelmed and Phaidon would be taxed trying to help. It would lead to a catastrophic breakdown in formation which would only spiral into dire consequences. So even without me here, Tana was enough to balance the battle. They didn't need me at all. But I was here, and the role I played could be described as such. Pure firepower. My job was to deal as much damage as possible without getting in the way. In fact, I didn't even need to observe much. That was technically Tana's job. And commanding the team could also technically be left to Vetsman. I was simply sheer killing power added on top of the team's skill set. I knew that well and wasn't under the delusion that I could do any more than that. So I wanted to get good at my job, because although I was technically only extra power, I could also dictate the flow of a battle. I could make victories absolute and turn losses into wins. I could save lives and dampen casualties. So I wasn't needed, but I was self-aware enough to know that my power would be desired in any team and all battles. And expectations would be placed upon me because of that, expectations that would bear the weight of not just victory, but the lives of those around me. So lacking skill in the only job I had wasn't allowed. I had to become a master at what I did as soon as I could do so. I had to improve at every step, using the experiences I gained at every level of power to better myself. Boom. I fired, catching a glimpse of the dead beast on the other end before shifting my sights to another. My hand chambered another round, the bolt sliding smoothly along its chamber and slotting in another bullet. My eye maintained visual through the scope the entire time, allowing me to quickly acquire my next target and fire again. And as my concentration peaked, I stopped noticing how much time had passed. I simply continued to fire. Until, at some point, there were no more enemies to kill. Everything went silent all at once, my gun being the last thing to sound. I lifted my head, looking at my squad ahead of me. They looked rather tired, as was I, but the surrounding piles of corpses showed just how much fruit our effort bore. Doing one last scan, I couldn't spot any other beasts coming toward us. With that, I finally relaxed. We did it. Tana cheered, her armor coated in blood. In fact, everyone was except for Amara and I. Killing so many beasts was bound to paint some things red. The others smiled, looking between each other. How is everyone? Any wounds? None here. Nope. I'm all right. After Vetsman asked, everyone shook their heads. I was the only one not to though. Having been reminded and with my tunnel vision fading, all the pain of my wounds set in again. They weren't bad, just a bunch of shallow stab wounds and some lacerations. My cigar and the healing had stopped all the bleeding and would ensure I wasn't in any real danger. But it still hurt like hell, and I had been laying on top of the crawler for hours. Combined with the exhausting target practice, I didn't feel like I could move. I groaned. I could actually use some help. Oh, right. John's hurt. What? With Tana's shout, everyone came rushing over. Vetsman directly jumped up onto the crawler and checked me out. I waved when he landed next to me. I'm fine, just some wounds from that wolf beast earlier. I got poked. Your clothes are bloody. Wait, you've had these for that long? Well, not like I was going to sew them up on the spot. I took care of what I needed to. Here, just get me down. I put my hand out, prompting Vetsman to take it and help me up. He helped me down the crawler and sat me down inside of it. Shining a light on my front side revealed my nice white shirt entirely red with blood, along with my pants despite it being a bit less obvious. It wasn't the first time I had gone so long without treatment, but unfortunately it only got more painful the more time passed without it getting at least cleaned and patched. It felt like my entire body was sore, every movement causing shooting pains to hit my limbs. I had basically caught a porcupine with how many sharp spines and claws that wolf had. It was only natural I was injured. What I was more pissed about was how Sir Hemet still had yet to return. Where the hell is our lovely commanding officer? I have no clue. He ran off and has yet to show up. Hopefully he's back before the sun sets. He better be. Shit, I need to get sewn up. I cursed while stripping my coat and shirt. Looking at my bare chest revealed several wounds across my torso, some of them long slices, and others being slender punctures. They had all clotted, and my cigar alleviated some pain, but not all of it. I let out a plume of smoke while looking up, glancing at Amara who was cringing while looking closer. She saw my gaze and asked, "Are you really okay? Do you need anything from the medkit?" "I'm fine. I just need a doctor." "Hey, why don't we all eat since we're stuck waiting? Phaidon, you mind pulling out the rations?" "Sure." Phaidon's face brightened at the mention of food, gladly going to fetch a bag of supplies. We all pulled out some rations and started chowing. After many hours of fighting, we were all hungry. However, I also used this opportunity. Nudging Phaidon with my elbow and nodding toward Vetsmon, I asked, "Do you guys mind watching for Sir Hemet on top of the crawler? I was thinking about laying down in here." "Oh, sure thing. Tana, could you go with them?" Tana lifted her head in confusion, her mouth full of food. That's when I saw the two men go into thought. Vetsmon was the first to smile widely as he looked between me and the only person I wasn't sending out. Phaidon quickly understood as well, though he seemed more surprised than anything. As for Tana, well, it seemed she was as dense as she was innocent. Vetsmon grabbed Tana, pulling her. "Let's go, Tana." "Huh? We all need to watch?" "Yes. All three of us can keep track of every angle if we sit in a circle." "But why? Just go." Vetsmon no longer asked as he dragged Tana out. Then, the crawler was left empty, light shining through the windows. Stuffing the last of my food in my mouth, I suddenly turned and laid down. My head landed on Amara's lap. I looked up, seeing her looking down at me with an embarrassed face. "Could you be more obvious?" "Hey now, I wasn't lying. I really do want to lay down. My body is killing me." "On my lap though? Seeing a pretty girl like you helps alleviate my pain." Oh. She smiled weirdly and looked up to hide her face from me. How cute. It was fun seeing her all flustered, especially knowing how she would get me flustered with all those prying questions. As she dodged my goofy grin though, I had a thought and adjusted my head a little. Because she was almost always wearing some robes, her figure wasn't all that obvious. I knew she definitely wasn't as curvy as Rayla, but even just looking up at her from the vantage point of her lap, I had a good portion of my vision blocked by her chest. It was just a cursory observation. I wasn't so picky even if I had preferences, definitely not enough so to diminish my thoughts about her. Still, I was a guy, and she seemed to be a sleeper. I couldn't help but click my tongue with impression. Plus, I couldn't seem to get over her ashy gray hair. Like Rayla's, it was an exotic color that mesmerized me. It was amazing to think it was completely natural. Not only that, but when I looked into her eyes, I found a deep purple that looked almost black. I hadn't really paid attention before, but they were beautiful. "You look good too." Suddenly, I heard Amara mumble, her eyes darting over to my body beside her. "You're not a knight, but you're strong." "Oh, thank you. Is there a reason you work out?" "I know it's good for you, but usually only knights need to keep themselves in good shape. Everyone else really only needs to be able to run. I think it's a matter of principle for me." I answered while thinking back. Ever since coming to this world, I definitely hadn't worked out as much. The city and magisterium definitely had gyms though, and there were even sports, though I didn't know any of them and didn't have the time to watch much. So I wasn't in the shape I was when I first came here. However, there was one thing that surprised me after a while. Given several months, I should have lost a good amount of muscle mass and weight after not working out for a while, my stamina dropping into the gutter, my muscles becoming less cut, and my metabolism coming to a halt. But very little of that stuff happened. I retained my shape rather well and my stamina no longer dropped to nothing within a week of no activity. I still ate a lot and felt just as strong as I was. I chopped it down to simply a consequence of being in this world. Perhaps the magic of this world brought that kind of benefit inherently, or maybe it was a benefit of being a magus. I didn't know, but I wouldn't argue with the results. Still, I did still do some workouts a few times a week. Hell, the Puppet Master's scenarios doubled as fantastic cardio. And I did so not to become stronger, but to simply not get weaker. I would work out regardless of where I was in life. Keeping in shape was good for me both physically and mentally, as it was for everyone. I wouldn't forsake that, especially when considering what I now did. I explained this to Amara, who nodded while listening. I see. That's good. Not that we have a choice sometimes. True. Sometimes those scenarios are nothing but a running workout. I think the Puppet Master makes us do those on purpose. Hee, yeah. And you? What do you do to keep yourself fit? Or are you just naturally built this way? I poked her stomach, feeling what seemed to be some pretty tight abs. She giggled and blocked me. I don't do much, just some basic workouts. Even warlocks need to take care of themselves. I definitely don't have abs like yours. Saying that, I felt Amara's hand move over and brush my belly with her fingers. My brows raised as she continued to stare a bit, but then, she frowned as her finger graced the skin around one of my wounds. They look bad. You've got a lot of scars too. Are you really okay? I'm fine. They're just sore. I'll be better once we finally get back to base. Saying that, I went quiet and shifted a bit, relaxing even further. Ah, how soothing. I smiled while nestling into Amara's lap a bit more. I heard her chuckle when I did, and then I felt some fingers run through my hair. Is this girl actually petting me? I felt her fingers comb my hair and straighten it out, her fingernails scratching my scalp. I felt tingly as she did that. Now I really was completely relaxed, almost enough to go to sleep. This went on for a while as she got more comfortable with what she was doing. I felt like I never wanted it to end. How unfortunate that I was hurt, otherwise I would be doing more than just laying on her lap. I felt a bit selfish being the only one getting treatment, but when I opened my eyes and looked at her, we both met with a smile. She seemed to be enjoying herself. That's when I heard the dreaded announcement. Sir Hemet is back.